for us. And before we even start, I want to thank you all for coming out on this Thanksgiving Eve day. We appreciate it. We've got a lot of work going on, both with this project and a couple of other very large projects in the township. And everyone on the board, and as well as our staff, has been working very hard to keep things moving along. So we appreciate the effort that you all have made to be here today. We have one agenda item for this meeting, and I do want to make a comment about our next meeting's agenda. Today we will be talking about the must ordinance in great detail, and that's all we're doing today. If anybody's here for anything else, okay. I wanted to mention that approval of minutes from our previous meetings will happen at our next meeting. So that will be on the 3rd, December 3rd, which is a Tuesday, which is also not our normal meeting date. So please take note that we are meeting on Tuesday the 3rd, 7 p.m. Thank you. For today's meeting, what we're going to do is, I want to let you know how we're going to organize the meeting because there's a lot going on. We'd like to do first is bring up some of the neighbors and property owners within the area where the ordinance is proposed and give them a chance to speak first. We want to make sure that they get their ideas out there. I know that they had to speak later in the evening last time. We will then be spending quite a bit of time on the traffic report. We have that done now. It's something we've been waiting for. And we'll be working on the traffic report, and Amy Kaminsky will be giving us her summary and helping us go through that. We then will going to turn and go to general comments and discussion continuing on the ordinance. These are things that have come up in other meetings, and some things that we've all been thinking about in the last few weeks. And then hopefully after that, we will go to regular public comment and a vote. Anything before we start? I would ask that everyone keep in mind when they're giving their comments from the public, from the applicants, and from the property owners, that you remember to address your comments to this board. We're not having a debate. If someone says something you don't think is right, you can say something later, but it's not a back and forth. All the comments should be directed to our board. That's why we're here. We want to hear what you have to say. George, are you leading off for your group? You want to go ahead and start?
Yes, we have a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go through, and the gentleman in the AV room said he would pull it up. I'm just going to have a couple introductory remarks.
Now, before you start, I did want to say, how long do you think your presentation will be? Because we do have a time. I want to promise everyone we are getting out of here by 5. I'm leaving at 5, so I have to make a peach cobbler. No.
I'm thinking it's 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
I'm George Brosman. I'm representing Brandywine Realty Trust. Through various entities, they own property that is directly affected by the proposed ordinance, as well as other properties in the immediate vicinity. It's our understanding that the proposed ordinance that you're considering today is the township staff version of the ordinance. The last draft that we had noted was dated October 28, 2013. We attended the Delaware County Planning Commission meeting on, I believe it was November 20th, and we listened to that, and you're probably aware that the Delaware County Planning Commission recommended against approving this draft at this time. They raised various concerns at the meeting and in the review letter that you probably have. We share many of the Delaware County Planning Commission's concerns about the revised must ordinance. On November 21st, we forwarded a package to you that contained a memorandum prepared by Dennis Glacken, who was our land planner. It detailed the concerns with the proposed must ordinance, as well as revisions to the draft ordinance, which would address our most pressing concerns. As you'll recall, we had been asked in the past by one of the commissioners to give specifics, one of the Board of Commissioner members, to give specific comments. So we've tried to do that at every turn. We also included in those materials a trip generation comparison that our traffic engineer, Greg Richardson, from Traffic Planning and Design, had prepared, and he'll explain that to you. We hope you've seen all of the documents that we've sent in. With that, I would like to have Dennis Glacken come up and go through the presentation that we have, and then he'll be followed by Greg Richardson. I'm going to try to pull this up now. Dennis? It's my understanding if you push the N for next, P for previous.
Okay, try to remember that. Good afternoon, which is nice to say instead of good evening. I would like to go through the main points that were in the memo that you all had gotten, I guess, about a week ago, and just kind of go through them and talk about some of our concerns regarding the ordinance as written. We really have 4 major concerns, and they're summarized in that the concern is that the overall density and the traffic impact of increased square footage and a lack of any requirement for traffic mitigation. The traffic mitigation, as set forth in the ordinance, kicks in when you're going for the bonus density. It does not kick in to get to the 0.7 FAR that's allowed. We have an issue with the definition of total site area, various assumptions as to public transit use, which Greg Richardson will talk probably more about than I will, and the lack of clarity regarding the proposed township recreation facility and how that fits into a lot of the discussions that we're having this afternoon. Regarding the failure to require traffic mitigation, the draft must ordinance allows about 2,100,000 square feet of space in the PLO district over and above what exists today. There's about 1,841,000 there today, and these numbers all come from the chart that you received from township staff, I'll say 2 months ago, regarding various scenarios in terms of densities and that would be allowed and so forth. There's no, and this is without the use of any density bonus. So if you utilize the must provisions, you have to get a conditional use. And this, of course, is summarized over all the properties, the 7 properties that are in the district. But you have over 2 million square feet of additional space, which is more than is out there today. So in terms of thinking about traffic mitigation and what should be required to more than double what's out there today, that's a huge increase. The traffic study is required. That's part of the impact statements, and that's terrific. Traffic studies are routinely required in this region for any sizable development. So the fact that one's being required as part of the impact study is great, but however, it doesn't deal with many of the impacts of a development on off-site intersections, for instance, which are beyond the control of the applicant at that particular time. And the traffic mitigation is only required if you're going from the 0.7 to the 0.8. And that jump is not really significant because, again, if you look at various calculations that you've seen before, the difference between a 0.7 and a 0.8 FAR is about 275,000 square feet over all 7 properties. So you get up to 2 million square feet basically as a matter of right. You go through the conditional use process, but the bonuses and all the bonus provisions that are listed in the ordinance really would get an additional 275,000 over 7 properties. And we think that's probably not the way it should work. There should be some mitigation required as part of the 2 million. The definition of total site area. This is an issue because of the fact that about 7 acres of the Biomed property contains a right-of-way that the Blue Route is currently built on. If we were just talking about a street right-of-way along the frontage of a property, it's not a big deal. But in this case, it's about 7 acres, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of a 36% increase. So if you include those 7 acres, which the way the ordinance is written today, you may be able to include, that gets you about a 36% more in terms of intensity of use. And that number, the total site area, is used when you calculate your impervious and when you calculate your FAR and your building coverage. And that's significant. The definition in your current ordinance on impervious coverage excludes any area of a lot within a street. So we think there should be some consistency, and I understand there's been some, I guess, historic interpretations in the residential districts that might be different from the commercial districts, and the saldo may not be exactly what's the zoning ordinance says, and this must ordinance, so there should be some consistency here in terms of what's countable and not countable when you do these calculations, particularly something like the FAR, which is based on the site area. The reason, and this is just a map showing the area I'm talking about. This is your zoning map. This is the biomed site.
Dennis, I'm told that when you use that, it won't show up on TV. Is there a way to use the cursor?
There you go. Okay. This is the biomed site. What was back? B?
P.
P, of course. Okay. This is the biomed site. This is the Blue Route. And this is the 7 acres we're talking about. So the question is, why should that be countable as part of the calculations for what gets built on this property? And again, we're not talking about, well, we are talking about, but the frontage along the property is not very significant. But in this one case, it really is significant. It's a big part of the site area. The next are assumptions versus as to the use of public transit. There's assumptions in the ordinance about what kind of credits you could use and shared parking and things of that nature. The fact is today, out of the approximately 5,000 employees at the Brandywine Corporate Center and the Financial Center, only about 70 people use the shuttle system that's there. So based on historic uses of shuttles, and that's, again, one of the things in the ordinance regarding getting a bonus, it's a very low number. The majority of the employees may travel from other suburban areas. Everybody doesn't live on the R5 line or in Delaware County that would use the 100 line. The big advantage of this site is the fact that it's at the Blue Route interchange. So you have people coming from New Jersey, Chester County, northern Montgomery County, and mass transit is difficult to use coming from those areas. So it's more than just being on a train line. I think it has to do with the location of this site vis-a-vis the 476. The farther away from the site you are from public transit, the less likely is that people will walk to it. This just relates to the number, where the location is of the 7 parcels in the district. And as I said, the proximity to the Blue Route is what makes Radnor attractive. Transit use incentives. If public transit is to be encouraged, there should be a disincentive to drive. And that can be accomplished through reducing the number of parking spaces so that people don't want to drive or are encouraged not to drive. So if you're going to get a reduction in your parking because you use public transit, that probably should tie into a reduction in the parking spaces. And that's the third point on that slide. Other concerns, and there were more in my memo, but I'm just going to hit on a couple here. The Township Recreation and Sports Facility. Plans we've seen, and that Greg will get into a little bit later on, show a large recreation facility in this area near the biomed site in terms of a joint township, private development of that site. I haven't seen, and I'm not the traffic engineer, but I haven't seen any inclusion in the traffic from that type of facility in the reports and in the various calculations that you've seen. There's also a requirement in the ordinance that allows you to not use the bus requirements for this type of facility. It refers you to a municipal use section of the ordinance. And I guess the question is, why would this be exempted from the requirements of the must? If you're going through all this trouble of passing the must with certain setbacks and coverages and so forth, why would you then say that this use, which could be a fairly large use, doesn't have to comply? Accessory structures, there's a 5-foot setback to the property lines. It's likely that any garage that's provided as part of this development would be along the railroad tracks. 5 feet's not even wide enough to get an emergency vehicle around the site, so you think that should be increased. The site's less than 10 acres. If you have a small site, it says you don't have to have 3 uses on the site. However, if you look at the percentages, there's no way you can maximize the site and meet those percentages. So in effect, you do have to have a mix of uses. And the ordinance should be clarified to that, because in one hand it says you don't have to have a mix, but you can't do 100% of anything on a smaller site. Maximum gross floor area, again, a good idea to limit the floor area to a particular size, but it should relate to either the size of the site or the amount of square footage you're getting in total. What might work on the Radnor Racket Club site might not work at the Radnor Corporate Center site, which is 54 acres. In fact, 2 of the sites right now have more than what's allowed in terms of the gross floor area. So that should have a relationship to the size of a property, not just be a flat number. Multiple family development use, there's a minimum number of 1-bedroom units. I think that in terms of a lot of the apartment jobs that I've worked on over the years, typically there's like a 50-50 mix that most developers will shoot for in terms of 1 and 2 bedrooms. The ordinance right now requires 65% to be 1 bedroom. We think this is a mistake. At the very least, it should be reduced to 60. And I just think this is something in your ordinance that you ought to take a look at. Off-street parking, there's a number of ways that's provided in the ordinance to reduce the parking in some fashion. The compact car provision is brand new. You don't have that in your ordinance currently, and it's allowing 25% to be reduced if you have compact cars. And this is a conditional use that you would have to go through. I don't know where the 25% came from, if it's based on a study of any type, but it seems like a very high number just for compact cars. The residential parking ratio, 1.2 spaces per dwelling unit, that might be fine for a 1-bedroom unit. I don't know that it's fine for 2 and 3-bedroom units. You already have 4 parking standards in your ordinance for multifamily uses. Your regular parking requirement, the Wayne Business District, and there's another district in the township that bases on about the square footage of the site. So this would be a 4th parking standard. The parking standards should be fairly consistent, and I would just ask you to take a look at that and whether the 1.2 is really the right number. The shared parking, you allow the 25% reduction. This is also new from your current ordinance. And some of the uses, I think it depends on the uses that are proposed on the site. Some of the uses are not good uses in terms of sharing. For instance, like a nursing home, perhaps a township sports facility, hotel with banquet space. These are uses that'll bring cars to the site and don't necessarily or work very well with, say, a residential use. Obviously, offices and residential work pretty good together, but there are other uses in there that don't work so well together. So we think that number should be re-examined. Density bonuses. As I said, you get the 70% FAR as a fact, the matter of right, or with the conditional use. I don't see any mechanism in the ordinance of how you get from 0.7 to 0.8. The ordinance sets forth density standards for the increase and says you have to do 1 from this category and 5 from the other category, but it doesn't give a method of calculation. Like how do you get from, say, 0.7 to 0.2 or 0.72 or 0.75? It's just not clear, and it just needs to, I think, be rewritten a little bit to say if you do X, you get this much. If you do Y, you get that much to get you from the 0.7 to the 0.8, unless the intent is you just go from 0.7 to 0.8 by doing the 1 from one column and the 5 from the other column. The final point regarding the ordinance has to do with the bonus options. Many of them are not objective. There's a lot of shall encourage, shall work with, and so forth. And some of them relate to what the actual tenants would have to do. So here you have an applicant standing here at conditional use saying, I want X number of square feet in this office building. I don't know who my tenants are. I don't know whether they can do or will do some of these things that are in there for the density bonuses. So in terms of achieving these density bonuses, there should be more objectivity to them. Some of them are very objective, and they're fine in terms of the meadow condition for the stormwater management. The other one's about the green roofs. There's a certain percentage you have to hit, but others there's just no way of measuring them. I mean, it says, provide traffic improvements for the Radnor School District. Well, where? What are they? Is it, put in a crosswalk at the Eichton Elementary School? Does that get you a bonus? So these just need to be rethought through and should be more objective so that you can measure whether applicants met the requirement, and the applicant knows what he has to do to get these. This chart is just a quickie, I shouldn't say a quickie, but it's a fiscal impact summary. I think I may have shown this to you once before, and the only point of this is there are significant benefits to the township and school district with the fiscal impact, looking at several ways of doing this. We had prepared plans earlier regarding the by right use of the property, and I understand there's disagreement on what that might be. But even if you took our number, which is 267,000 square feet, it shows a net fiscal impact to the township and school district of a plus million, almost $1.5 million annually. Also, we had done alternative plans that you had seen, I think, in the first PowerPoint show, which showed totals of $1,893,000 and $1,381,000. So really the only point of this is that there's a lot of alternatives that could be developed for the sites that would yield a significant fiscal impact to the township. And this chart just kind of summarizes the small print. It's a big print with the numbers I just read. So there are fiscal benefits to this. The mixed use is a great idea. This is a good site and location for an ordinance like this. It's near public transit. It's near an interchange. None of those things are in dispute, but I think there's a lot of details of the ordinance that haven't been thought through or tested. And I think that as part of your review, I asked you to do those things. Next is traffic. Unless you have any questions of me, Greg Richardson will talk about traffic.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Greg Richardson. I'm with Traffic Planning and Design. We have been retained to advise Brandywine and to provide support for them in reviewing the documents that have been presented to the township as far as traffic and traffic-related issues. One of the things that we have, let me see if I can make this work without, okay. What we wanted to do in this process was to take a look again at the scenarios, and we've heard a lot of discussions with traffic, the traffic studies that were forthcoming, and we understand that you have a traffic study now. So I won't try to be repetitive in that issue, but I know we all want to get out of here before the holiday. So, but what we did as a group was to try to look at the different scenarios. We had 4 scenarios in mind. We were looking at the existing trips, what's out there now, with the existing square footage of the office uses that are presently along this corridor, looking at what a full build-out by right would be for the PLO district. And then we looked at 2 of the scenarios with the must ordinance, with and without the bonus density. And when we looked at the breakdown of the what I'll call the must scenarios, we tried to look at it from a realistic standpoint of a mix of use, tried to look at it from the standpoint of trying to look at what the ordinance provides as far as a maximum build out of those areas and in terms of different land uses. So when we look at our comparisons, there's going to be, in some cases, going to be some variations between what Biomet has presented to you as well as our scenario. So that's not uncommon when you're looking at it, just when you get 2 engineers in the room. One of the basis of our analysis was the must build out analysis. The spreadsheet that has been presented to the township has been derived by your staff. Won't get into those. I'm sure you've seen those numerous times. What I'd like to get into is, without getting bogged down in the numbers themselves, which I think you could look at the analysis and in terms of brevity. The one thing that we wanted to emphasize with the comparisons that we derived were that certainly building out the full by right of uses and the realization of the traffic that would result from the PLO district certainly is going to increase traffic over what it is today. And that is going to be also true for the must. And I think what has been discussed, some of the things that we have heard from a traffic perspective is that it's not going to be as bad as what has been presented and what the opponents have been you know, emphasizing it, and when we get up, for instance, us, or Brandywine, when we present our traffic numbers. One of the things that we have to look at is the assumptions that are made by the biomed presentation. And one of the things that we have some disagreement on is the transit use. And as Dennis had touched on earlier, there's a big issue when you're discussing traffic, is that assumption that 15% of the trips are going to be reduced by for the different various land uses, and how you apply that across the board. Do you take a strict 15% decrease for the office, for the transit use? Certainly there can be some consideration for transit, but we have to be very careful using that number and using it as a broad brush and reducing the trips. One of the things we took a look at was, and we've seen some presentation by the biomed traffic consultant, that the two stations on either side of Radnor has increased its ridership by approximately 25% over the last, from 2008, 2011, and that for varying reasons that has occurred. And that for some reason Radnor has remained stagnant in terms of when you compare the other two train stations. And what we want
is this what used to be the R5, or is this the Route 100 trolley that you're talking about? Both of them?
For both, actually, yeah. One of the things that we looked at was the actual projections for the Radnor station. And we looked up the information, obtained it from SEPTA's website, from their annual projections for all of their train stations. And if the slide that you have before you now projects is the projection for this train station for the year 2014. You basically have 541 people are projected to board the train, and 500 for an average of 520 using the train over a whole day on a weekday. If you use the percentage of breakdown of the decrease in traffic that biomed wishes you to believe that for the whole PLO, for the must ordinance, that's going to result in approximately 6,000 trips reduction over the whole day. And what that would mean is that this train station would become, if all their projections are right, would become the 5th busiest train station on the line, putting it up there with 30th Street Station, Suburban Station, as well as, and even have more traffic than foot traffic than Paoli, which has an Amtrak line. So you have to be very careful when you're using these numbers and using it as a broad brush methodology of projecting these volumes, because for the many reasons that Dennis had mentioned, there are a lot of factors going into how these people access the train, how far they're willing to walk, and people just, we love our cars, and this being near the interchange, it's hard to get people out of their cars unless you have some incentives. And we believe that incentive portion of it has not been put forth enough to be effective.
Let me just give you a heads up. You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, all right. And I think I only have a couple more slides anyway, so. Dennis had mentioned, again, these items are items that the township has, as far as the sports facility that is potentially would be located in the near vicinity of the biomed application. We'll go through each one of these. This is a location, one potential location, the Radnor Racket Club, which is directly adjacent to the biomed site and in the proposed must ordinance area. So one of the things that we have concerns about is whether the township has considered that traffic that would be generated by that particular facility, and then adding it into what is being proposed for the must ordinance itself. Again, it's a combination of the impacts of all the properties, these 7 properties, as well as what could potentially happen for this facility, which would be a great thing, I'm sure, but it still should be considered.
Greg, before you go from that slide, the Planning Commission should understand that that's.
Mark, you're going to need to get on the mic, please.
Okay.
I just want the board to understand that this slide was not something that we have prepared. This is from the township's, I believe it's from the township's website. This is something that was prepared by the township's architects in Toronto and shows the Radnor Racket Club and our property as where this ice skating facility, this big arena, is going to be one of the possible locations where it's going to be developed. So I just didn't want you to think that we created this slide.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, and then the last slide, or the next to last slide, is the projected parking that is, again, contemplated for the projected size of the arena or skating rink or whatever you want to call it at this point, which contemplates approximately 3,700 seating capacity and for the different rinks, 3,200, I believe, in one rink and 500 in the other. What does that mean as far as parking? And the projections are that the proposed arena would have over close to 1,200 parking spots. So that alone, you can see, is contemplating an enormous amount of traffic that would be brought to the area. If you're contemplating the need for that many parking spots, I would tend to think that the transit would actually apply more for the arena than it would for the proposed uses, because if you think people are attracted to sporting events and they sometimes just don't want to deal with the parking, so I would tend to think that the transit calculations would be accurate for this use, but I don't believe it would be very accurate or even logical for the proposed uses. And finally, to get away from the traffic aspects of the numbers and the must ordinance, one of the things that I'm sure you've discussed many times is the projected improvements by Biomed that they have presented preliminarily. I'm sure you haven't seen a full plan, of course, but one of the things that has been presented is that they would be willing to widen King of Prussia Road along their frontage, at least. We have shown it up to Radnor Chester, is that you would widen that road out to a five-lane cross-section. Certainly that could handle and accommodate their traffic along their frontage, but what happens when you get off the site? You have we believe you have three bottlenecks to the north that we're not sure what you can do there. And we have not seen at this point any recommendations for any improvements off-site. Again, it gets back to the issue that Dennis had mentioned previously, is that the ordinance itself really doesn't have any teeth when it comes to obligating a developer to mitigate his or her impacts off-site. So unless you have any questions, that's...
Greg, I had a question for you. Could you, what did we say, P?
Yes.
Just highlighting, I can do it briefly to expedite it. This was, again, part of the information we had received from the right to know request. And I don't know if Greg touched on it, but at this point, and I think this may have been dated back to August, you're talking 243,000 square feet. So it seems like when you hear the term recreation center, one image comes to mind. I had an image of something smaller in my own mind. And it looks like this is going to be a regional arena type facility, possibly. And I think I did see an email that suggested that, this is still being looked at. And I think I saw something saying there were going to be a proposal for a larger facility. And we're not against an arena like this. It may be a very good use, but it's been added to this ordinance now. And we just think it needs to be considered, and the traffic implications of that, along with all of the other uses. And then finally, I don't know how you're going to proceed. There's going to be other presentations. If there's time, we'd like
We'll
some
ask
time
you
to
to come up and
respond.
respond during public comment,
Sure. And
but only briefly, not another presentation.
sure.
But thank you, that was very interesting. We appreciate it.
Could you move that down so I can see the top heading? And can you have these slides sent to us?
Sure. What do you want me to do,
I want to
Kathy?
see what the darker blue says.
I don't know.
upper part of the,
Julia, while he does that, I have a quick question
we
for
do
Mr.
that?
Richardson. My two quick questions are this trip generation report that you did, was any of this based off of actual counts, or was it all off of ITE trip generation?
It was based off ITE.
Okay, that's one
We don't
question.
have that,
The
though, do
second
we?
question I had is, early in the presentation, you made mention of the 70 people who take the shuttle. Do you have any information on how many people walk from the R5 to the building at 201 King of Prussia Road, which is adjacent to the R5?
I do not know.
Okay, and then the third question is, where did you get this information about the Radnor racket, or the Radnor Township Community Center?
I can answer that.
Oh,
To
thanks.
your first question, it's between 12 and 20 people.
So between 12 and 20 people who work adjacent to the R5 walk to work? Use
In the
the
201
train?
building, there are 704 people who have security access to that building. Between 12 and 20 are known to take public transportation, as informed by the tenants who occupy that building.
Thank you.
I want to mention something to the board. DuPont Pavilion, or what used to be called DuPont Pavilion at Villanova University, is considerably smaller than this. So as scale, you might want to keep that in mind with their athletic facility that was built next to us. And think about
Yeah.
the possible numbers that could come into this area, and we have not considered this traffic at this point on there.
Kathy, I don't want to deliberate.
Okay.
No,
Just
we're
had- but
we're
I'm
not
just trying
going to
get the answer
discuss
to my
this
last
now. I'm
question.
going to keep a very tight rein on this meeting because we are going to be out of here at 5 o'clock.
Yes,
So
sir.
we were going to get to board discussion in a minute, and I'm going to just be rude and tell you to hang on.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
if I can, the rec center can be removed from the ordinance. There's no problem with that.
Yes, and we're going to get to
Because
that
really-
during board discussion, and right now, I'd really like not to have any more comment on it.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to ask if Mr. Goodman would like to speak as a property owner. Are there any other property owners here who would like to speak? No. Okay, thank you. What we're going to do next is the board is going to go through topics that have come up, both today, previously, as you reviewed the ordinance, in discussions that we've had, wherever. We'll be relying on both parties that are present here, of course, Mr. Goodman, too, if it relates to him. We will be asking you questions, possibly. Please, answer the questions. Don't speak to one another. Direct your answers to us. And, of course, we'll be relying on staff as well. Before we do our overall discussion, we're going to start with traffic. That's what we've all been waiting for. That's what we've wanted to see. And I'm going to ask, Amy, are you going to come up and do that for us?
I'm not sure what you were looking for me to do, go through my memo?
Yes.
Okay. Is it loaded to, I wasn't aware that we were going to be,
Surprise.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
while you're speaking, I just want to say, just to eliminate, the rec center can be pulled out of this ordinance. So I'd recommend that you do that as one of your changes. Because really, it's a moot point, because
Yes,
as long as we don't have money, this is very preliminary. So to not do this, you can actually remove that from the ordinance.
Thank you.
Sure.
good afternoon. I'm not sure if you want me to go through their PowerPoint, and, because I haven't seen any of the numbers or any of the information in it.
Would you
so-
prefer that they do their PowerPoint and then we talk to you? I was thinking you could just do everything.
They just did their PowerPoint.
I'm sorry, did
The
you
one
want
that
to?
was just presented to you that I personally had some
Brandywine.
comments on that one. I know that. And I'm asking you if you would like me to comment on that.
No.
Or if you would like me to just move directly to the memo that I prepared.
I think what I'd like is for you to move directly to the memo that you prepared based on the other traffic study. And then if in board discussion comments come up about questions about either traffic study, if you'd be available then to answer
Okay.
those.
Okay. Okay, there we are. Okay, I was provided with, boy, is that confusing, to look at one thing and speak to another. I was provided with a memorandum, I believe that you have that, that was prepared by McMahon and submitted to Biomed, and it was included 8 slides to discuss the potential impact that developing the site based on the existing conditions and the projected conditions, and for using the must, and then also doing a density bonus for point 8. So if we'd like to start on page 1, the first page is just identifying the background of the entire discussion. And then I went through a point by point, trying to explain what the slides were that were being discussed. Some of the key things that I do want to point out is the, if you head down further, there's a discussion about internal, the existing trip right there on slide 4, existing trip generation. The information that was developed by that is from the Institute of Traffic Engineers Trip Generation 9th edition. And it was based on the information that was in Kevin's slide that he presented a while ago. There were some discussions back in September of 2012 where we had come to an agreement on the credit for transit reduction based on PennDOT's strategies that they include in their strike-off letter. That's what the second paragraph is regarding that. And then, so there's a summation at the bottom of that indicating what the total number of vehicle trips could be anticipated for the full build-out for the PLO district. And then moving further down, there's a discussion at that point talking about the baseline, and much like what I discussed in the previous slide, it's based on the ITE trip generation book, and then based on the mixed use and the proximity to the transit, there were many studies that I've gone through to look at what transit reduction you might anticipate, although many of the studies that I had showed different ranges from 30 to 50%, and I brought those publications along if anybody's interested in reading them. I felt that it was better to take a conservative reduction given the socioeconomic area that we're in. You wouldn't anticipate that you would achieve that 50%. And the other thing that I did want to point out was that the studies that I went through indicated that 1,000 feet is the distance that you typically would want on the working end of your trip. From the residential end, you could actually go up to 1,500 feet. And the reason being that at your home, you're a little bit more willing to walk a little bit further, whereas at the work end of your trip, you prefer to have a shorter distance to walk. So by reducing that to 500 feet being the outside, again, we were taking into consideration the socioeconomic characteristics of this area and the fact that we wanted to have a more conservative analysis. The next paragraph is talking about the internal capture reduction. When you have different mixed uses that are occurring on a particular site, there will be a reduction in the number of trips to each of the different uses because somebody might come onto the site and then visit 2 or 3 alternative locations within that site. So you might enter the site to go to work and then go visit the bank. So you would reduce that trip for the bank use. Or you might enter the site to go to the bank and then head to a restaurant. So you would reduce your trips based on those types of characteristics. And there's a table that we use to develop those depending on the different uses on the site. And given the amount of interaction between the site ranging in between 2 and 50%, depending on what they are, you would anticipate that somebody come in for a retail use might have a higher likelihood that they would visit a restaurant on site, or somebody that works on that site might be more likely to visit the restaurant site. Those types of uses tend to be a higher interaction rate. So we went with a conservative lower rate for this analysis. And then moving down, I go into a little bit more detail on the transit reduction, identifying the different pubs that I had done my research through, and discussed why we elected to use the certain percentages for the transit reduction. I felt that it was more conservative, and I thought that that would be a better analysis and provide a much more conservative analysis. If you look at the note that I put in underneath the transit reduction is basically looking at the comparison of what when you have an AM peak hour trip, so many of the trips are coming into the site, and so many are leaving the site at that time. And when you have a misbalance on the trips entering the site and exiting the site, you tend to have difficulty accommodating those left turn lanes, and you can have queues occurring. Whereas if you have a balanced distribution around the intersection, then you're more likely to be able to distribute that time more evenly on all the approaches, and it's a little bit more efficient when you're doing your signal timing. So I thought it would be helpful for you to see that based on the office use for the PLL existing, there are 6.5 times more vehicles coming into the site than leaving the site, which is what you would anticipate for a work-based type of trip coming into the site. And then during the afternoon, we are looking at a ratio of 4, meaning that for every trip entering the site, 4 of them are leaving the site. So again, you get that congestion on one side of the intersection. You don't have balance around the intersection. So by providing some kind of mixed use, you would tend to even out the types of trip distributions that are occurring. So if we move on down to, wait, let's go back up, I'm sorry. So we move from 6.5 for the AM. That was the ratio between the trips coming into the site and exiting the site with the existing conditions. We've reduced it to 2.1. So we're sitting at 2 vehicles are coming in for every vehicle that goes out in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we moved from the 4 ratio, meaning 4 trips are exiting for every single trip that's coming into the site. And when we go with the 0.7 for the must, we end up with 1.7. So it's a little less than a 2-to-1 ratio for trips entering and exiting the site. So moving down to slide 6, discussion. As far as the internal interaction, we just took a 15% across the board for that internal interaction. And we had a 2% reduction for the transit demand management, which is consistent with what PennDOT allows for in their traffic impact studies. And there was also the 15% for the transit reduction based on the studies. Now again, even though the studies showed that there could be as much as 50% reduction for transit use, the 15% was thought to be a lot more conservative, and I felt better able to justify that, the use of that number. So moving on down. For the entire district, slide 7 shows what the potential impact would be for district-wide. And as Mr. Richardson had pointed out, when you have several traffic engineers doing the same calculations, we often have different numbers that come out. And for the purposes of this discussion, we were more concerned about overall what the impact would be. We'll be fine-tuning and making sure that numbers exactly match when we get into land development. But I felt that there was a potential increase of 179 trips for the morning peak hour for the entire district if it were to be at 0.8 for the density bonus for must, with a net increase of 456 trips for the PM peak hour if the entire development was the entire district was redeveloped and everyone had elected to use the density bonus. So looking at specifically the biomed site, you would anticipate that there would be 91 trips if they elected to use the density bonus in the morning, and then 31 additional trips for the PM peak hour. No, they are not reduced. The one thing what ends up reducing is the fact that the vehicles that are leaving and entering the site, you now have more balance on those trips, so it could potentially appear to be less vehicles because you're more concerned about the queues that you're sitting in. So if you're exiting during the peak hour with office trips in the afternoon and you're sitting in queues in traffic, if you reduce that by 50% because now they're entering the site, they're workers coming home to their apartment or something like that, then it could potentially appear to be a decrease in the number of trips that are occurring out there.
Before we go to board comment, Does, Nick, do you want to do 5 minutes before we go to the board comment about the traffic?
Sure.
Thank you, Amy.
I have John Wichner from McMahon, and John, you heard you only have 5 minutes, so.
But tomorrow you get turkey.
I do have a PowerPoint presentation if I could. Where do I? Right here?
I have no idea.
All right. Good afternoon, John Wichner with McMahon Associates. I did have maybe a longer presentation to discuss. However, it does mirror the submission that we made to the township about a week and a half ago that was reviewed by Amy. Just to discuss maybe some of Amy's further comments on page 4 of her memo, if I can read her findings. States that we have reviewed the data on all slides and are satisfied with the methodology, calculations, and totals as presented. And she goes on to say that all reductions approved for transit and internal interaction are more conservative than indicated in studies. The purpose is to analyze the greatest potential impact the MUST may have in the PLOA district. So it is likely that the MUST will have less traffic impact than presented in this discussion. The benefit of providing a mixed-use development within near proximity to transit facilities could reduce the overall traffic impact to adjacent intersections and should be considered by the township for approval. I don't want to. It's a good way to kind of summarize my presentation and my submission to the township and leading to Gilmore's review. If I can just maybe touch upon a few things that were said here today. One of the things that was interesting in Brandywine's presentation was that in Kevin's overall spreadsheet that was presented last month, that we talk about existing development within the 7 parcels, and then what could be developed under the existing by right ordinance on those same 7 parcels. And currently, about 1.8 million square feet are developed on all these 7 parcels, but upwards of approximately 3 million square feet, 3.3 million square feet could be built under the by right conditions. That would increase traffic by about 82% without off-site improvements, without a conditional use process as well. And the limitations of this MUST ordinance really protects, I think, the township against scraping each of these 7 sites, building 82% more square footage under a by right scenario, leading to 82% additional traffic. Again, no requirement for off-site improvements, no conditional use process that gives the township another bite of the apple. What that also shows, when we went through our subsequent analysis, taking some of Kevin's numbers, and where Kevin talked about maximum square footages under the MUST ordinance, both under baseline as well as with the bonus densities, that is assuming each of the 7 parcels break leases with existing tenants, push their existing tenants out, completely wipe and raise every building on each of those 7 parcels, and then builds under the ordinance. That's very unlikely, in my opinion, to happen. And I think that each of the 7 parcels are kind of going to pick and choose, where they may see opportunities for development. So the numbers that we had presented, that Amy had reviewed, really were maximum square footages that are allowed under the ordinance. But as you can see, under today's 7 parcels, only about half of the amount of square footage that could be built by right was actually constructed. And that kind of goes to show that there are site constraints. There are limitations to developments. There are some parking requirements, impervious coverage requirements that, again, shows that our analysis is, in my opinion, conservative because we went maximum development. But as you get onto a site with steep slopes, with setbacks, with other kind of requirements, those square footages start to scale back a little bit, much as what's seen in the existing conditions here today. Even though we went through a maximum development situation, we go back to some comparisons here, where under the baseline must ordinance, based upon our calculations, we're actually going to see less traffic. And then under the existing trip generation of those 7 parcels, in the afternoon, there will be slightly additional traffic. Under the maximum density for 0.8 development with all the maximum density bonuses that you get, there'll be slightly more in the AM peak hour, more in the afternoon peak hour. In the afternoon peak hour, as you can see, based on our calculations, about 420 additional trips in the morning peak hour. In the afternoon peak hour. That really relates to 1 new trip per parcel per minute in this district. And that's really what it boils down to with 7 different parcels. If every parcel broke leases with tenants, kicked the tenants out, raised all the buildings, and developed under this must ordinance. But again, with that 1 new vehicle per parcel per minute, each of those 7 different parcels, under this assumption, would do 15 different, meet 15 different criteria for the bonus densities. Again, mass transit improvements, signalization improvements along Lancaster Avenue, and again, it's all spelled out in the ordinance, 15 different improvements per parcel to achieve what we think is a very conservative estimate. I know that I wanted to kind of keep this brief here. If you guys have any questions for me, I can go through some additional slides and things of that nature.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have board discussion. I'm sure there are going to be questions for you, but I wanted it to come from the board.
John, there was one comment during Brandywine's presentation regarding transit ridership.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, they were showing approximately, based on your numbers, that would have to be about 3,000 trips or whatever, transit trips.
I could speak to that a little bit. I don't know where those numbers came from.
Well, if we have questions about that, we'll ask them.
Yeah, those weren't numbers that we presented, but again, the foundation of this district is mass transit and mixed use. From a mixed use perspective, taking out a portion of the office component that was in the current PLO district, taking out the office component or majority of it, and replacing them with lesser intense uses for traffic works from a mixed use perspective. And from a transit perspective, it's shown that in information that we had submitted to the township, Spring Mill and Conshohocken stations have seen 23 to 26% increase in ridership since 2008, between 2008 and 2011. Radnor has seen a 10% increase in ridership since 2008. Now, at Spring Mill and at Conshohocken, there have been major private development investments in mixed-use developments in those areas. And
I'm going to have to cut you off. We need to move on.
Radnor
We
has
do
seen a
appreciate it,
10%
and we
increase
will have
without
questions
that.
for you, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start board comment, I just want to, amongst ourselves, have a reminder of what our goal is. I would like to see a vote today, regardless. I know some people are leaning to vote no, some yes. But I think what's really most important is not how the vote goes. It's that we get our comments and our considerations, the things we're concerned about, to the commissioners. They've asked us for our input. They want to know what we think is important, where we think the hangups are, what are the good things, bad things. So what I want to have at the end of this meeting, apart from a vote, is I want to have a very specific list so that we can, write a very informative memo about what our stand is on these issues. A lot of the issues, we've talked about before. We'll talk about them again today. So please keep in mind as we're going along that at some point later in the afternoon, we're going to have to come to a consensus on those issues to see where people stand, to see what we're going to forward to the commissioners. Although I'm sure they're all at home right now watching this meeting. So there you go. So I'm just going to open that up to board comment, and I'd like to start with just traffic issues for the beginning.
I have a starting question, and I apologize. So far, of all the traffic presentations that we've seen, and we've had traffic metrics from Biomed, from TPD, from McMahon, and Amy's analysis, thank you, Amy, has there been a single analysis that is the actual traffic counts that exist today? Or has everything been a trip generation analysis? And if one of them was an actual trip count today or recently,
I'll
could
take
somebody
that.
tell me which one it is?
I'll take that. McMahon did take traffic counts of the driveways. The problem is that Biomed at this point isn't fully built out.
No,
And
that's why I wondered.
that's why.
Okay.
And one of the things that I did want to point out is that we typically find that the IT trip generation is higher than what typically occurs with traffic counts in the future. So we felt that that was a better way, greater. Again, we're trying to make sure that we see the largest number of vehicles that would be possibly coming out of the site.
The reason I ask, and if somebody could point out to me which set of numbers is actual trip counts, and it's actually possible that Brandywine did a trip count, because where I'm going on my base level of this is that my experience of the traffic in that area is already that it's already horrible. And if already horrible is reflective of only 20% of the existing traffic that could be there, or 30% or some percentage of what's existing today, and isn't even a reflection of what could be done by right, then that speaks volumes to me about the direction in which this ordinance would need to go. So I'm trying to get a handle on that. And nobody ever speaks about the capacity for the roads. We always talk about trip generation and counts, but nobody talks about what's the capacity that King of Prussia Road can hold and not have it be a C, D, E, and F traffic situation, or Lancaster coming off of the Blue Route, and compare it to what we have, what we could have by right, and what's being proposed under a variety of different must ordinances. And maybe capacity isn't something traffic people speak about. I have no idea.
Actually, we do speak about capacity. Just to remind you that when Biomed first came in, oh my goodness, last year, 2012, I can't remember the exact date, but I do know that they did take traffic counts of the various intersections around there and provided the level of service capacity analysis. And I believe that I did do a review on that. That was based on it remaining as office, if I'm remembering correctly, because it has been a while. So there are traffic counts for that, but at this point, what we're trying to determine is if the by right, the number of trips associated with the by right development for the entire district, how that compares on a vehicle by vehicle basis to what you would anticipate would be developed with the must under the development that they're allowed to do for the 0.8 density bonus. So no, there's been no impact at each intersection analysis performed, not to my knowledge anyway.
I actually think it would help to have those numbers, because if we see what it's like today with the way it's currently occupied, we know what we're living with when we try to go through there, which we also try to avoid. So you think of the number of people who are trying to avoid it, knowing the back roads. I think comparing those numbers to what could possibly happen would mean more to us than not having those numbers. To know, say, between 4 and 6, this number of cars is going through this intersection, and then have those points. You really have 4 points. You have Lancaster Avenue, and you have the 3 points that were pointed out on King of Prussia Road, the bridges and so forth, and then the entrance on the Matson Ford Road. And I don't see anything that can be done with those intersections other than tearing down houses and putting up a new bridge. And I don't think that's acceptable to Radnor Township. They could handle any more traffic. We're really very, very constricted by the existing roads. And the feel I get is that the residents and the commissioners in the area that would be affected by this do not want that to change. They want to keep those bridges in position the way they are to limit the traffic that is going through there. So that's what we have to live with. So I think having those numbers and comparing them to possible increases would be very meaningful to at least me, because I know what we are personally experiencing trying to travel that area during morning and evening rush times. So that's my thoughts on it.
Well, if I could interject, the problem with that type of analysis is that you would have to identify what those improvements are and then move forward with trying to mitigate that. And that's typically what you do during the land development phase. So in order to get that information, that would be presented at land development, and there are the potential improvements that were identified in the MUST ordinance. So I understand what you're saying, but I'm also just want to let you know that then that would take you to the next step of identifying what the improvements are, and that's kind of putting the cart before the horse as far as moving forward with the
But I think one of our
ordinance.
concerns is that if we get to the point of land development, let's say this ordinance is adopted by the commissioners. If we then get to the point of land development, and there's a problem where there's a development where more traffic studies are done and we feel like there's too much traffic, we're worried that then it's too late. They've already gotten the right to do this development. And we keep running into that, and we don't want to cut off our opportunities to make those decisions now.
And
the way
that's
I
something
feel.
that we need to consider, but you also need to consider that what are the unintended consequences if this ordinance isn't adopted and that site is redeveloped according to by right and you get 475,000 square feet of office in there where you don't have a choice. You don't go through a conditional use. You don't get the traffic improvements. You don't get multiple bites at the apple. So the unintended consequences of not doing this ordinance are much greater than if you were to implement it. So that is the flip side, that what the applicant can do by right in the existing footprints and under previous approvals, that they can do where they don't have to come in front of this body and you can't make recommendations. That is the bigger question that needs to be answered.
But Kevin,
But they would come in because it's land development. And I think realistically speaking, a builder is not going to build out something that you can't get your people to, or that you don't have enough parking for, because they want to rent the space. And if they can't get the tenants in there, they're not going to rent the space.
They already have land development approval. They can make minor modifications to the site without land development approval and get 475,000 square feet of office in there
With what's there now.
with what's there now. And under previous approvals. They've already gone through land development.
When?
Years ago.
It was a couple years ago, and the Permit Extension Act is applicable, and they are grandfathered in until July of 16.
But
So
but if
that ship has sailed. The traffic for that would be significantly worse than what would be under this ordinance.
But Kevin, two things about that. First of all, I mean, we got the notice about zoning, so that could change in terms of the 475,000 square feet. And then in absolute numbers for the whole area, 475,000 square feet of by right at that property is still dramatically less than what could happen throughout the whole development of the whole PLO district. And we could easily fix this piece by just considering taking in Delaware County Planning Commission's comments and requiring the traffic mitigation for any MUST ordinance, not the density. I mean, that alone would make a huge difference if we take Delaware County's comments and recommendations about that one item alone.
I'll get into the county's comments later.
I had a question, Kevin. The 475 you just referred to, isn't the build-out under the .7 FAR already have over 400,000 square feet of office space, plus a hotel, plus an apartment building? In other words, you say the consequence of not passing the ordinance is that they'll build 475, but isn't the consequence of passing the ordinance is potentially they could build 850,000 or 900,000 square feet?
Sorry, gross square footage is different than office square footage. The office square footage would be capped under the MUST and would be less than what would be permitted by right.
But
Total
not
square
much, but
footage.
like 50,000 feet.
Total square footage would be higher, but you're talking about a mix of uses, which gets into the TOD concepts and trips alternate trips leaving at different points of time, that the residential that's part of that increase in square footage has different trips at different peak hours in different directions.
I'm a big fan of mixed use. What I'm trying to say is that it strikes me that they're going to build twice as many square feet. However, those trips are calculated under the must ordinance, especially with the bonus, versus the by right under the existing ordinance. Is that more or less right? Even if I'm off by 30, 40,000, 50,000 square feet, the difference in the office is negligible and the hotel and the apartment are extra.
Under by right office 475 existing, the office that could come in with all the density bonuses would be capped at 422,776 square feet.
And so the hotel and the apartment are in addition.
Correct.
And whatever trips they generate, they're in addition.
They're in addition, but they're also occurring at different peak hours and in different directions.
So hypothetically, if traffic was the most and only issue, which it is not, we should just not do anything but keep the old ordinance, because the downside is not that great.
From a traffic standpoint, the new ordinance does a better job of what than the existing ordinance does. Plus, you get transportation improvements, you get infrastructure improvements, and you get significant increases in the fiscal revenues coming into the township. So
I get the revenue piece, and there's definitely an argument there. The improvements, though, the traffic mitigation, everything else, is only in the bonus.
no,
No.
I'll get into that at a later point.
I'd like to make the comment that we keep talking about, well, we'll deal with that when it gets to land development. Since we're writing an ordinance as opposed to evaluating a particular thing, I think this is the time we should be talking about the kinds of, not necessarily the specifics, but the kinds of infrastructure improvements that we're going to want as a part of the development of this whole thing. For example, if it is our intent to make traffic move better onto the railroad and then basically end and turn right on what's that, Madison Ford Road? Then we ought to put in place in the ordinance at least the ability to have the people who would make these developments put into escrow, if necessary, money so that after 2 or 3 of these developments occur, we have the money to get Amtrak to widen that bridge or that roadway.
And that is in the ordinance. That's something that, without speaking for the commissioners, when a particular project comes in, I know Amy said that those types of things are looked at land development. That's currently how they would be done. Under this ordinance, those would be looked at before land development during the conditional use process. And the traffic mitigation is in the development impact study. It's addressed in 2 different sections in there. The county failed to look at that, and quite honestly, I think that they failed to read the ordinance as it was submitted to them.
May I ask Amy a question? On page 3 of your traffic analysis, where you have the note under transit reduction, and then you said, note the full build-out of this site is based on the potential traffic, that note there. When you were speaking, you made mention of multiplying something times 0.7, and I'm just trying to figure out what you were multiplying by 0.7.
What I was doing was a comparison ratio between the number of trips entering and exiting the site. Right now, you have a higher number of vehicles entering the whole district in the morning, and then you have a disproportionate number of vehicles exiting the site during the PM peak, because it's predominantly office workers that are in there. So they come in the morning and then they exit in the evening. So by allowing this to become a mixed use, what you're doing is you're distributing those trips so that they're more evenly distributed throughout the day, and you get more even distribution during the AM peak hours and the PM peak hours. So instead of having all the vehicles traveling in one direction, you have a better balance between the ones entering the site and exiting the site. So we've reduced the ratio from the existing conditions, where I talked about in a previous paragraph, 6.5 times. If you go back to page 2 under slide 4, the note, can you see the numbers there? I talk about 2,200 are entering and 340 are exiting. That's a ratio of 6.5. 6 for every vehicle exiting the site, 6.5 are coming into the site. And that's where you develop your queues and you have the delays that are occurring because all the traffic is moving in the same direction. Whereas under the mixed use that's being proposed here, you end up with a better distribution, and it could potentially appear to be less vehicles even out there because they are more distributed around your intersection.
I've got another question. So what points were these traffic counts taken from? Just entering and exiting the site?
They're not actually traffic counts, they are...
Projections?
Yes.
But there's the site?
It would be distributed around the entire, all the entrance points to the district. So the majority of your traffic would be coming from Lancaster Avenue, probably from 476.
But I guess the question, so people that live in this apartment, 500 people live in this apartment, and then they leave to go to work in the morning. And so you have that one, and they're going out. When they get on Lancaster, now they're queuing in with everybody else. So that is an increase in traffic, right? It's going to be recorded as that.
And we would be looking at that, yes. We would be looking at the ramps at that point. Some of the trips would be heading towards Villanova potentially. Some of them would be going north on 476, south on 476. And during what we would typically do, that traffic impact that's required under this ordinance, we would be looking at that more microscopically. Right now, the analysis has been a macroscopic, just a comparative analysis between the number of vehicles depending on existing, the must, and then the must with density bonus.
So I guess what I struggle with, I struggle with two things conceptually on the traffic. One is, so you're going to build, if you leave it the way it is, you build 475. If you change it, you build like 4.25. To me, they're close enough to the same number. But yet, if we do this mixed use, we're going to lower the traffic count. Meantime, we have the same amount of office square footage, but we're dumping significantly more residential traffic onto the area roads. And to me, that doesn't seem like a reduction. It seems to me that's going to be an increase.
It's on a district-wide. We didn't expand the analysis for this ordinance impact to the entire Radnor Township area. It was basically looking at the district-wide, what the potential impact would be at the intersections surrounding the entire district.
Okay, because, I think that's significant, right? To understand what the impact of traffic is going to be, to the whole area, right? Not just one subset area.
I understand what you're saying, but you also have to understand that we did not do the traffic counts or do those capacity analysis.
No, and that's okay, I understand that.
And that's where that would come into, because the numbers that we have are looking at the potential impact for increase of vehicle trips. We did not sit down and see what they are here, where they project out, give it a 20-year or 15-year horizon, and, that whole analysis wasn't done.
Okay. And that's let me finish with my second point, but, that's some of the things that we struggle with is after we pass it down the road, well, we can't do anything about it anymore. So that's number one. The second thing is, if you take a 30% reduction, which is 15 and 15, and you're left with 2,500 trips, that means you reduced away 1,000 trips. You reduce 30% of the trips away between having them stay on site versus public transportation. And I hate to try and outsmart consultants and engineers, and people do this for a living, but conceptually that just seems like a 30% reduction for those two benefits. It just seems like way, way too high in light of where this is located. If this was located in Ardmore, right by the train station in downtown, I probably would buy off on that a little more, but this just seems way, way too suburban and rural to me, and it just doesn't feel like that makes sense to me conceptually.
Well, I'm not going to sit and argue with you. I'm just going to let you know that I too was in disbelief at the percent that I was asked to take a credit for on transit. So I did my own personal analysis. None of the information was provided to me by anybody else. It was done on my own time because I feel as a traffic engineer that it's important for me to understand what the effects will be for my client, you. And I am very comfortable with those numbers. We're looking at a 15% transit reduction compared to the industry standards that is showing between 30 and 50%. So I understand what types of use we have here. When you're residential in nature, you have a higher, you were just talking about Ardmore, there's the distance that those homeowners walk to the transit station is probably much greater than 500 feet. So I do feel very comfortable with that 15% reduction for the transit.
I have a question for you, Amy. Maybe you just answered this, but on this 15% reduction, you're referring to the transit reduction on page 3 of your report?
Are you at the bottom?
I'm at, on page 3 of
Yes.
4, transit reductions.
Yes.
The end of the paragraph, it says a reduction of
Yes.
15% was approved.
Yes.
Okay. Do I understand that that means that 15% more people who presently ride the train are riding the train, and that's how you, and that works a traffic reduction?
No, it's not more. It's including the people that are currently riding. So it would be an increase from the percent that currently ride transit. So if right now you have 5%, there would be an additional amount of transit riders.
That would be an additional, excuse me just a second, Susan. That would be an additional 15% over?
No.
Additional
It would
10%?
include, it would, yes.
And that's based on what sources of information?
The ones that I cite in the upper paragraph where it says transit reduction.
So the real increase
those-
in ridership would be, or use of the transit system would be approximately 10% more than what currently uses it?
Correct. And it's by putting in those mixed uses, having them within so much distance of your transit, providing those pedestrian improvements there, doing different strategies like that, you would anticipate that you would get a greater increase in your transit ridership.
And if you don't get that increase, let's say you don't get that 10% increase,
Well, yes, I guess
what happens to your traffic numbers? Do they go up?
if they don't get the transit riders,
Yes.
potentially by limiting your parking spaces. I've heard
No,
some
I'm not
argu-
asking that
No,
question.
I just want to say there's a lot of things that play into it.
I
It's
understand
not
that, but
all-
my question is a very simple
Yes, the
question.
vehicles will be there.
Traffic increase if that number's
Absolutely.
wrong? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now, the 15%, is that premised on people who take the train from elsewhere and get off in Radnor in the morning to go to work here?
It includes an overall average for the entire site, so
So
it's
that's people commuting into Philadelphia in the morning and coming back in the
not
afternoon?
necessarily Philadelphia.
Well, commuting someplace other than Radnor.
Correct. But it could be bus, there could be other ways that they transit in.
So this includes people who take the bus?
It does. It also includes residents that would be living in the apartments.
So that's the 105 bus out on Lancaster Avenue that they could take?
I'm not sure what the numbers are or what the,
But
if that's
the point
the
is-
bus that's there, then yes.
The point is, if I understand what you're saying, that these numbers are not reflective of people who are going to be taking the train or the bus or the high-speed line to Radnor to work in Radnor,
It goes both ways. It's an
or
overall
to leave
average.
Radnor in the afternoon
It's-
by public transportation.
It's an overall average for the site based on studies that actually presented higher percentage reductions.
But Amy,
I want to make a point because I think this is a good place to put it in. I was able to speak with both Regina and Elizabeth, who couldn't be with us tonight, this afternoon. And one of the things that came up in that discussion was the possibility, where in the ordinance would there be a possibility to consider a ramp onto or off of 476 if it turns out that either onto or off of, which would be more helpful in lowering our traffic volumes. And is that something that can happen in land development, or do we have to look at that before?
Well, it's a PennDOT road, so it would be discussion with them. PennDOT has some very specific policies and an entire publication on breaking what they would call as putting in a new ramp. But that is certainly something that could be discussed with them if that was something that the township was interested. I do want to point out that you have some significant items, construction items that would make it very difficult to make those ramps occur. There's elevation differences, you've got some SEPTA lines running in there, and I'm not saying that it couldn't occur, but it would certainly help the situation. It would help regardless of the development or not.
Sure. Madam Chairwoman, we had asked as part of this, and there's a proposal we have from Gannett Fleming, the township's engineer, to look at that as well as the bridge on Matson on King of Prussia Road about widening that. Biomed has agreed to 50% of sharing the cost. It's approximately $100,000. I'm not sure if Brandywine's able to commit to the other 50,000, which previously they had mentioned that they'd be interested. That we think both of those who generate the traffic and impact should pay for that, not the township. So that's what we are looking at doing. That proposal's out there, so. we've
Are you
not-
saying that 200,000 would widen that bridge? That seems like a very low number.
No, it's one.
Just a
it's-
study.
It's the
Okay.
study to do the whole area, the entire
Yeah,
area.
I was going to say, that number really seems
Well,
well.
I think we would have done it. No, it was at $100,000.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
I say we do it if it's.
I have a comment on that. I think it was brought up at one of these meetings that probably would not happen because of the proximity to the existing exit there, and also because of the things that you mentioned, Amy, about the elevation differences. So I think, although that would be great if it could happen, I don't think it's really something to look at that realistically will happen.
Getting back to the key question, though, is does the ordinance allow for that? And yes, the ordinance already does allow for that. As part of the density bonus provisions, the applicant could construct off-site improvements through coordination and identification of what those improvements would be with the township. Ultimately, the Board of Commissioners would have final say as to the type of improvement, the level of what the improvement would be, and whether or not that would qualify for the density bonus. Those provisions are already in there, and they're written so that the board has input as to what those improvements are. And it was mentioned earlier about a crosswalk. If the board doesn't feel that that is a significant enough improvement to justify density bonuses, it's written in the ordinance that it's at their sole discretion and they can deny it. So those provisions and those safeties and mechanisms are already in the ordinance to allow for those types of improvements. They're undefined specifically so that the township does have input.
I have another
you.
question for Amy. With all due respect to the analysis that's been done, and it sounds like most of the information we've gathered about traffic and transit reduction and all that has been theoretical and studies, and I appreciate the work you've put into it. The answer that I received from the Brandywine people that only 12 to 20 of their 704 workers that are in the building right next door to the R5, according to their survey of their tenants, that only that number walks and utilizes the R5, that the percentage is so low in the building that is probably the closest proximity by far of any of the buildings in the PLO. I'm not going to say to you, do you know why that would be, but rather does the fact that for whatever reason the ridership is so very, very, very low, and 70 to 80 of the 5,000 workers use the shuttle down to the Radnor Financial Center, does that impact your thoughts on the 15% analysis?
Well, I know there's a sea of parking out in front of their site, and I think that having readily available parking can sometimes create a better opportunity for it. I do know that residential is likely, if somebody's going to come into this area and they're looking for a residential apartment that's near a transit facility, that would be likely. So I am very comfortable with that. And again, I don't have the information. I haven't seen anything that they've developed, or if it's word of mouth, or what kind of survey they did with their workers. But you also have to consider that this is actually a district-wide. I don't know if there's been any studies at all the facilities, but when you take an average and you call it 15%, that means that some of the areas are going to have a higher percentage decrease for transit. There's going to have a higher percentage, using the transit. So I can't really comment on the information that you're stating.
Amy, do you have any idea the number of people actually getting on and off in the morning at the Radnor station?
I believe somebody presented that today, earlier. That was
But he
presented
said
earlier.
500-ish.
How many? Well, no.
569 or something in there.
Something like that.
Could you define those numbers? Would you mind, quickly? And I'm wondering, like per hour, how many in the morning and how many in the evening?
This is for, the numbers we obtained were from SEPTA's projections for the year 2014.
No, I'm talking about now.
Now, I don't know the exact number, but if you use the 10% increase that has been projected and presented by Biomed, you can just use that as a starting point and just say it's possibly increased by, what's that work out to be, 10% increase of 500 would be 50.
Greg?
Okay, so approximately 50 an hour now?
Well, that would be the increase over this year. So if, let's say there's 450
A day.
today,
Okay.
it'll be 500 next year.
All right,
Yeah, Greg-
so that 450 you cut in half because it's the same person, basically 200 people.
No. Greg, the number that you projected it was a 2014 projection, so it's probably pretty accurate. It's not that far out. It's not like we're doing a 2020 projection or something like that. So I don't have that information that you presented today. What was the boarding and lighting that you provided earlier?
It was 541
Okay, so
boarding and
540.
and 500
A day.
lighting.
That's,
Right.
Okay.
now that was that boarding in the morning and lighting?
That's daily.
That's on the daily.
That's
I-
daily basis.
I
I
thought it
have
was
numbers
AM.
from SEPTA for the Norristown high-speed line, northbound, southbound in the morning, and in the peak hour in the morning and in the afternoon. Northbound, there's
From
two-
Radnor?
From the Norristown high-speed line, not from the R5. 296 northbound, 75 southbound. Leaving the site in the evening, 71 go northbound, 384 go southbound. So that's one station of the two.
How many of those people are and maybe I'm not asking this question clearly enough, and I'll let anybody who wants to take a stab at it, take a stab at it, but how many of those people are getting off at the Radnor stations to work in Radnor as opposed to getting on the train in the morning and riding to Philadelphia or Ardmore or Bryn Mawr or someplace further west to go to work and then returning to Radnor in the Radnor Township in the evenings? You know, I think in order to have this be a significant real number that we can get our hands around, frankly, I don't think the information exists. That how many people are actually get on the train in Thorndale in the morning, get off in Radnor, go to work someplace in Radnor, and then reverse that process in the afternoon. Or ride out of Philadelphia, get off in Radnor, work in Radnor, ride home. I'm sure there's some of them, but how many? Does anybody know?
I can't tell you where they work, but I can tell you that at the Norristown high-speed line, 370 passengers get
Heard
off.
those numbers,
Okay,
and I
well,
understand them. You're not answering the question.
Okay, here's the answer. There are no numbers to support that. It's very unlikely that SEPTA polls the riders to ask them when they get on the facility where they're exiting. So it's very unlikely that that information is available.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, I do have some data that was collected, specifically the Norristown high-speed line. In the morning peak hour, about 86 persons get off of the train. Now, where they work, is it close in Radnor, or further away in Radnor? I don't exactly know, but 12 get on, 86 get off. In the afternoon peak hour, 74 get on the train, and 28 people get off. So those, because they're getting off in Radnor in the morning and getting back on in Radnor in the afternoon, the presumption is that those are typically employees somewhere in the close vicinity.
Have numbers like that for the Paoli-Thorndale line?
I don't.
I think we're getting a little
I don't, but the daily
off the
numbers are very
topic,
similar.
people. Let's try to stay focused.
I had a question for him, though, actually, because I have notes from the October 8th meeting. I wasn't here, but I watched it online, and I believe you're the one who gave the presentation, because I changed my pen color, where you talked about trip generation, and that based on existing traffic counts, you had 75% go south to Route 30, 25% go north to King of Prussia Road. Just right, this all rings up.
That's
and
correct.
That you did traffic counts at the intersection of King of Prussia Road and Radnor Chester Road. And in the morning, they were 2,166 trips in an hour, and that the PM peak was 2455 in an hour. And then you talked about maintaining the RHS curb line constant at King of Prussia for traffic roadway improvements. Anyway, I'm just trying to match up those numbers that you gave in the presentation last month with the traffic study that you presented here, where you're saying the proposed plan would only put in 667. Are you talking about 667 for just biomed? Correct. These new site trip generation numbers are just for the biomed site?
The numbers you're discussing are just for biomed. That is not above and beyond. That is if there was no traffic at this particular site today, those would be the numbers during the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hour. And of that, 75% does go south to the intersection of King of Prussia Road and Lancaster Avenue. 25% go north.
Okay, well, I mean, actually, I'm looking at your existing trip generation, and it does seem to, the 2,000 or so in the AM peak and PM peak do seem to pretty much match up with you have page, I don't even know which, existing trip generation. So it is kind of matching up with that 2,000, I guess, for all 7 properties in the PLO.
The earlier numbers you referenced about actual vehicles at the intersection of King of Prussia Road and Radnor Chester Road are not the same set or data points as shown in trips to the entire district generated by these 7 parcels shown on slide 4, 5, and 6.
How are they different?
I guess there's apples and oranges. The number of vehicles, if you take account morning peak hour at King of Prussia Road and Radnor Chester Road, ranging from 2,400 to 2,600 vehicles in that peak hour, those could be from anywhere. They could be retail trips from someone's house to King of Prussia. They could be trips completely not generated or not associated with the 7 parcels in this PLO district. The slides that were presented in the McMahon memo a couple weeks ago are specific to the 7 parcels in this district. And as shown in the last page of the slide, and this is a good opportunity to get this out again. But the last page shows that in a by right scenario, in the morning peak hour, that's 475,000 square feet. A by right scenario, 620 trips in the morning, 567 in the afternoon. Under the proposed plan, in base density, there's actually less trips in the morning and 4 new trips in the afternoon. It's when you go to the bonus densities that create additional traffic, but then with that include the 15 different criteria to achieve those bonus densities.
The one last question for you, I'm sorry, I had a whole host of them, but the property that would be generating the 600 and something trips in the morning, why do you need 1,950 parking spots for that? Because actually, Amy said something when I asked about the ridership of 201 King of Prussia Road. You know, she talked about the parking that's fairly abundant there, and I think that's the one thing that we're all going to be able to agree on. If we provide sufficient parking, we are guaranteeing that transit won't be used. And so
No, we need to keep the parking down to a level that encourages
Yeah, no, right. So I'm
the
trying to,
highest level of ridership possible on the transit.
right, so that's why I was trying to understand this 1,950 parking spots for 650 trips.
Well, I can answer that in 2 ways. One, we can't correlate one trip to one parking space. Nick may come into the office at 7 a.m., I may come in at 8, Mike comes in at 9 a.m. That's one trip in the heaviest peak hour, but 3 parking spaces. So when we talk about the heaviest peak hour in the morning and the heaviest peak hour in the afternoon, there's maybe 90 or 80% of that traffic an hour before and 80% of the traffic maybe an hour later, but we always focus on numbers and capacity for the heaviest peak hour, because if you can design for the heaviest peak hour, then the other peak hours also operate. So there may be 3 trips for people coming into work, 1 trip in the heaviest peak hour, and 3 parking spaces. And on the flip side, a lot of tenants desire in their leases a comfort level or a parking supply that certainly is higher than a parking demand. They don't want, whether it's a retail use, a residential use, or an office use, they don't want their one employee circling the entire parking space looking for that last spot that was going to be demanded. They want to have a comfort level of maybe 10 or 15% of overflow parking, so as you travel down drive aisles, you can sneak into a spot, but they don't want someone looking for that last possible space on campus.
Let's move on. We're going to move on from this.
I have one question. I've been waiting. In your first presentation, when Biomed had a pure office presentation, my recollection, and tell me if I have this wrong or not, the transit piece, the trade-off in terms of a credit against trips, instead of 15% was 7%. Why is 15% better now than 7% then?
Based upon the mix of uses.
It has nothing to do with the mix of uses. It's the pre-must. It was 7% when it was all office.
Because that was what I had dictated to them back when they came in for the traffic impact study 1.5 to 2 years ago. And that was just based on what PennDOT allowed in their strike-off letters. PennDOT, in one of their publications, identifies what transit credit you can take based on your FAR and a few other factors, and provides a 2% credit for TDM. So they had come in originally with a higher transit reduction, and I had actually forced them to reduce it to match the maximum that PennDOT would allow.
So you're saying then on a hypothetical basis, the reason we got to 15% is because one of the uses is a hotel and the other is an
No.
apartment?
No, it's because Amy did more research. And PennDOT tends to be a little bit slower in working through things and analyzing data and accepting published documentation. And we weren't at that point where the applicant Biomed might have force-fed something to PennDOT to have them accept the higher reduction.
Or lower
So,
reduction? you
The
mean.
lower, well, actually, they would want to force PennDOT to take a higher reduction for transit. So that was my preference at that point.
I have a question and answer. So how many, from both train stations, how many people are getting off in Radnor? Did you, 86 was one, or was that both?
That was at the high-speed line.
High-speed line. Do you know what the R5 is?
I don't, but the daily numbers are very similar, so I'd have to assume that they're...
Along the order of
Roughly.
80-ish, would assume? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, roughly, yes.
Fair enough, thanks.
Yep.
I have one real quick question. The buildings that were Wyeth or Centacor now, as I remember when we went out there and visited, they said that they're almost empty. There are very few tenants in there. Is that correct? I mean, if there used to be 400 people in it, now there are 20. That sort of makes a difference.
Yeah. Basically, the answer is yes. I'm not certain how much. I believe, what percent you think is full of the space that's there now? 50?
Yeah, can you talk into the mic, please?
Yeah, I believe it was 80. You were saying that. Go ahead, Matt.
Probably 2 floors left of people, which is about 80,000 feet. So, take that times, 2 per thousand, that's probably the number of people there at Centacor.
Thank you.
Which would be like 80,000. That'd be like 150 people. What were the buildings, if they were full, how many would be there?
If they were full, take 427,000 feet, which is there today, and
Okay.
probably do the same math.
5 times as much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I would like to just see a show of hands. Is there any public comment regarding the traffic studies? So I'd like to do that now. We'll do 3 minutes a person. Just come on up.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I rarely go this way. As a matter of fact, all of my business is in the Bryn Mawr area. But last Thursday, on a semi-emergency basis, I transported a good friend to the Penn at Radnor Medical Center. We got to the corner of, and we had to be there at 25 of 9. They were seeing her before their day started. We got to the corner of Lancaster Avenue and King of Prussia Road, and it took 20 minutes to get to Penn at Radnor. Now, you don't have anybody, you have very little people at Centacor. Granted, there are a lot of people who are going to Penn at Radnor, and they definitely do not have enough parking. So I would, not knowing, I'll bet you a lot of their support staff are taking public transportation, because there is no parking at Penn at Radnor. But it took us 20 minutes to go 1 block. Now, I don't know whether you can include the whole area, because you're just really looking at the right side of the road, but you need to know that is going to be constant pressure. Those practices seem to be building. They seem to be gathering more customers, more patients. And it is, I've heard from several people who go there to their doctors, that they have a very, very, very difficult time parking, which means they're going to be out on the road. They're going to be trying to get in. So there's a lot of your traffic that I suspect you're not including. Thank you.
Thank you. No, you're not public comment. No, sorry, he's not public comment. He's the owner's comment.
You said we would have public comment.
We're going to have more public comment later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to make sure we weren't going to be foreclosed from traffic.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Also, I don't quite understand why we're going to have public comment on different aspects, but I'm going to take my chance as well here. Rich Booker, I'm the commissioner-elect for the 2nd Ward, and we also have our current commissioner here, as was noted, Kevin Higgins. Couple things. What is the current traffic that we're using right now, current number of trips? Now, the only people who have done that, Susan, that I think is a reasonable number is the Brandywine folks, so got to take it with, from their slant. But what they came up with was 98 in the AM, 122 in the PM, as it stands today. Basically 100 trips. Sarah's right, you all are right, you've been there. It's very difficult even to negotiate with 100 trips. I hear the theoretical traffic. I'm very shocked that we're talking about this theoretical as if what we have today doesn't matter. All of a sudden, we're talking about trips based on some theoretical number, which is 5 times or 4 times higher than what we have today, and saying, well, it's not really that much. It's a huge difference compared to what we have today, and many of the people on the board have made that point very, very well, and you see the issue. Yeah, maybe you could get 400 today, but that's going to be 3 times what we have today, just on the traffic, just on what they have right in there today, let alone adding a hotel, let alone adding the residential area, and with a slight decrease, right? Slight decrease in the office. Now, what I also wanted to talk about was the high-speed line. Everybody's like, well, how many people are using the high-speed line? I drive by this site every day because I live on Belrose Lane. This is my neighborhood. I've been here for 14 years. I know this, and I'm one of the guys that travels into the city every day. Okay, we've used all of them. The Paoli Thorndale high-speed line. Remember, the high-speed line takes you to 69th Street, then you have to take the L to get to Center City. So it's not that convenient, but people do that and then drive. Honestly, I drive most of the time because the train is really not that good as it sits today, in my view. I prefer to drive. The people using the high-speed line, the 83 that get off, they come down and they stand there, and everybody in the neighborhood knows, they stand there, they are taking the bus somewhere. You see, every time I go by there's 20 or so people. That's who get, the people coming off the high-speed line, they're standing there waiting for a bus. So they're going someplace else. I don't know where they're going, but I don't think they're not going to these developments we're talking about. Out of the R5, the people, when they come off of the R5, most of them go across the street to the Kessler Topaz law firm, that big building, right? That building that's there. Some of them go under the bridge, and there's a couple of office buildings on the left-hand side of Camp Pressure Road if you go under. So some of the people go to that. But so it seems like the people riding the R5, they're getting off and going to work somewhere. Most of those people, they don't seem to be. Most of the elevated people, most of the high-speed line people are taking the bus somewhere else. It must be convenient for some areas. They might be in Radnor, but they're taking the bus someplace. A couple more things. Traffic to current, we just talked about. Then land development phase. This is the time when we have to consider traffic. You guys, you all know, if you pass this ordinance, we won't have a chance in addressing any traffic later. Come on, we know this, and this planning commission recognizes that, and you can tell by the comments. This is the time to do it. Unintended consequences. What Kevin is talking about, I'm very surprised, and I know that Kevin and Amy are working hard here. It's almost like they sound like they're not objective. Maybe to me it does sound like that.
Can you keep those opinions to yourself, please, and wrap up?
No, this is public comment. This is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, but I won't let anybody insult our staff during public comment.
I didn't say, I'm not insulting the staff. I said, it sounds to me. Now, I can't see how we can possibly make a statement that there's more unintended consequences from not passing this ordinance than passing this ordinance. It just defies reason. So the traffic, I think, is this is my traffic question, my traffic comments, and I'll have more when we go on. But the unintended consequences are far greater from passing the ordinance than not passing it. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other public comment? George, you want to come up?
I'll be brief. This is just on traffic. Could I get the screen to come up here? I just wanted to show you something.
Yeah.
We blow up this. Can it blow up or not? Is that readable?
Yes.
This is to address our concern that if this is a conditional use, what powers will the township have? There's case law on this too, but the simplest statement of it is this is a provision from the municipality's planning code, what a zoning ordinance may contain, and it specifically says in 603C 2, provisions for conditional uses to be allowed or denied by the governing body after recommendation by the planning commission. And it goes on to say that in allowing a conditional use, the governing body may attach such reasonable conditions and safeguards, and this is the important part, other than those related to off-site transportation or road improvements. So this is specifically stating that even with a conditional use, there's no off-site road improvements that can be attached as a condition. Conditional use is a form of permitted use, and the law says that when you allow it, you're allowing all of the normal impacts from that use, and an applicant should not be denied because you allowed the use. So you expected all the normal impacts. The normal impacts certainly include traffic. So we think it's very important that this be considered now and that the traffic not be underestimated. And I can tell from your questions, you're very keen on that. So that is something we
Thank
would
you.
like you to keep in mind.
Can I ask a question on that?
No. 1 minute, and then we're going to go to more board discussion. 1 minute.
I'll be quick. Just to clarify a previous comment, we also did counts at the existing biomed site in May of 2012. During each of the peak hours, there were about 200 trips. And then a year later, when Brandywine did their trip counts, there were about 100 trips. So that site is continuing to decrease its occupancy, its effectiveness, its utilization, and it will be developed. And under a by right plan, under the current ordinance, it can generate more traffic than under a must ordinance with the base density.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're taking a 5-minute break, and then we will move on.
site area in calculating impervious coverage, although you do not have to count the impervious coverage within there.
Kevin, if I could interrupt there, I believe that was on the, where the flower shop was?
Correct.
Okay, that's a very small development, and I agree with you, you are returned there. However, we're talking about the blue route going over this thing.
We're talking about the area of the site within the right-of-way, and you can point to numerous examples where that has been consistently done over the course of the years, even on Brandywine's own project, where they were the beneficiaries of that. It's good for them, it's good, it's consistently across the board.
Now-
That's the way it's been done, and that's the way the ordinance, it's not inconsistent with our ordinance, it's consistent with the existing language and the way it's been
I
interpreted.
hear you. However, I think when the Biomed property came in for zoning, they only showed the 18 acres on their plan when they were asking for whatever they were asking for then. So now all of a sudden, this extra 7 acres shows up there because they want to intensify the property more. I question it. And I hear what you're saying about the way it's being done. And in this particular case here, I don't see how you can count 7 acres of right-of-way as not a major impact on this.
Well, regarding the Biomed site specifically and the zoning determination that I issued for the 475,000 square feet, that was based off of the smaller site area. There's a variety of examples where, depending on who prepared the plans for the site, what areas were included. I can point to 200 Radnor Chester Road. One set of plans showed the area exclusive of the right-of-way. The next set of plans showed it including the right-of-way. So it's been all over the board. Ultimately, the way it has been interpreted is that the area within the right-of-way counts. To start excluding it for one site because one applicant doesn't like what another applicant's going to propose, I think is not appropriate. Consistently, we've been enforcing what the zoning hearing board has handed down to us since early 2012. We talked about the shared parking and the reduction of parking. One of the things that the ordinance currently does is cap the amount of parking. It's at 105% of what the code would have, so there is a cap. A developer can't just overpark a site. There's also provisions in the code to allow for conditional reduction of up to 25%. So those provisions are within the code to limit the amount of parking. It utilizes shared parking concepts in addition to compact car spaces. Parking strategies, it was mentioned earlier about that this would be the 4th different parking standard set forth in the ordinance. This is the first type of use, if you look at the different districts in which that's done, where we do allow for a mix of uses on a site. Obviously, when you do have a mixed use where you do have shopping areas, that there are efficiencies with that, with the internal captures. That's why you would need to have different parking standards. It's not appropriate to apply the same standard across the board for all uses when the uses interact completely different with each other. Regarding comments regarding the density bonuses, it's quite simple. You meet the alternative requirements required for Category 1, those from Category 2, you get a density bonus. There's no complicated math, there's no complicated calculations. It's quite simple. You provide the alternatives to meet the density bonus, you get your choice of a density bonus. There's 3 available density bonuses. There's no need to complicate it to figure out, based off of site area and lot area and percentages. The mix of uses already does that. So it's straightforward, it's clear, it's concise. No further need to further complicate that.
Can I ask questions?
One final
Kevin
thing.
finishes.
One final thing we talked about, and if Peter wants to get on the legalities of off-site traffic improvements, I've heard from Brandywine that our ordinance fails to mitigate traffic off-site. Yet they just showed the MPC that under conditional uses we don't have that ability. Our ordinance doesn't require off-site traffic mitigation unless a developer voluntarily chooses to do that through the density bonus provisions. We can, through that bonus, require off-site traffic improvements. It's at the discretion of the applicant to come in with that. There's no other way to do it legally. You can't require it. The MPC says we can't require it. It's a voluntary thing. If they want to do density bonuses, they have to do off-site improvements. It's all discussed under conditional use, but it's not mandated through the conditional use process. So there's a big distinct difference in that. Their ordinance, our ordinance, can't require off-site traffic improvements, but the applicant can voluntarily do those if they meet certain off-site traffic and get some density bonuses. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Kevin. Before we go into the board questions, if you don't mind, Kathy, now we're going to have general public comment on anything. Please don't repeat on the traffic because we want to move ahead. So I open up the floor for public comment. Yeah, in this case, everybody's public, but keep it short. Because after we have this comment, then we're going to have our discussion. We may or may not ask you questions, but we're not going to be taking any more presentations. So, public comment.
Because we have not had an opportunity to present on the ordinance itself.
That's right.
And we have Tom Committee here, who's a land planner, 40 years of experience, and he would make some comments about the ordinance. Tom? And about some comments that were made to the ordinance as well. Yeah, do you have copies of Tom's review?
Yes,
Okay.
we've read, well, everyone got the memo, right?
Okay.
Yes, we've read your memo.
Okay.
Hi, Tom Committa, town planner and landscape architect from Westchester, Pennsylvania. Thank you for allowing me to talk. I'll be brief. I previously had worked for Radnor Township as a subconsultant to Cahill on the Wayne Business District Master Plan. And so that was several years ago, right after the comprehensive plan was completed. And so my familiarity with the subjects that we're talking about today in part stems from being familiar with the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. I'm also very familiar with the PLO district for a variety of reasons, having worked in the last 40 years in the area. In terms of the ordinance that the Planning Commission is considering, that being the October 28, 2013. In my overall review, and I read Mr. Glacken's comments and I read the proposed changes that were offered by Brandywine, my overall take on them is that when looking at the existing PLO uses, ideas like reducing the amount of office space from 45 to 33% didn't seem logical to me because PLO already allows what it allows as office. For example, there were concerns about parking, that 1.2 should go to 1.5, that the compact spaces at 25% should go to 15, that the setbacks at 5 should go to 15 feet. In terms of weighing these, and as a planning commissioner trying to evaluate and put weight on the comments that I'm making, that Kevin has made, that Mr. Glacken has made, and so forth, I think in large part you have to look at what's there in terms of playing the hand that we're dealt. And the buildings are where they are. As Mr. Wichner said, there are existing conditions that tell us certain metrics that you've already asked about. A lot of the setbacks, a lot of the numbers, a lot of the metrics are actually welled up from what's at PLO, in PLO, what's out there today. And so in my overall review, I thought two threshold items. That number one, that the proposed ordinance of 1028-13 is in fact normative and I think appropriate given what's out there. The other thing is, although there are scintillas of discussion that have taken place today on one particular metric, he said, she said, and so forth, at the end of the day, the questions that I would ask if I were a planning commissioner is, number one, does this ordinance comply favorably with the comprehensive plan? And in that regard, I'd like to just spend a few moments to talk about that. And the second one would be, does this ordinance represent anything that would adversely affect health, safety, and welfare? And I defer to your familiarity and knowledge about the traffic and your placing weight on the different traffic engineers' reports. But in terms of planning and the comprehensive plan and the well from which you might draw, there are 6 particular sections that I think are favorable to the October 28th ordinance. Under the housing goals, it talks about provisions for opportunities for diverse population. That, in fact, was the only one mentioned by Dennis DeRosa in the Delaware County Planning Department review. What Mr. DeRosa didn't point out are the following 5 items: that under the housing objectives, it mentions strategies to increase housing density, particularly near transit centers. Under the housing objectives, in several places in the plan, it encouraged mixed-use districts. Under the land use goals, it mentions accommodating reasonable growth using innovative growth management techniques such as transit-oriented development. Under the section on existing and proposed land use, the comprehensive plan indicates that the PLO district at the former Wyeth facility, and it specifically mentions the former Wyeth facility, requires the need for a sophisticated approach to future development. And I think for all the reasons Kevin Kuchansky outlined in terms of the checks and balances, that would fit into that category. And then finally, this is very important, in the Radnor Township Comprehensive Plan, the zoning map appears in the section on existing and proposed land use. And in fact, it ratifies the PLO district, so much so that it includes the southern end of the Biomed property as PLO. Another very important item that I mentioned in my review is that when you look at the entire township, PLO represents 0.2 square miles or 1% of the entire township. It is the core office district. And so where would you want to have office? You would want to have office in PLO. Owing to mass transit possibilities, you might ask yourself, where else are there 2 transit stops? In the neighborhood where I grew up in Manayunk, there are 2. In Chestnut Hill, there are 2. In Radnor, along this thoroughfare, there are 2. And so in terms of the whole southeast Pennsylvania region, where else might there be an affinity to have this type of mixed use? Unfortunately, you have it right here. And so I just wanted to emphasize those points because while I defer to the traffic engineers, I think from the standpoint of those issues that you would address, realize that I'm here representing Biomed Realty. I am usually representing municipalities, and in the last 40 years, I've represented 115. Our firm represents about 30 to 40 each year. And on matters where you're weighing the considerations for a zoning ordinance amendment, I often advise the planning commissions that I consult to look closely at the comprehensive plan, and I just summarized that, and then ask yourself the question, is there a fatal flaw in the ordinance? Is there something that would tip the scale to adversely affect health, safety, welfare? It sounds to me from the discussions this afternoon that traffic is the hot number, hot ticket here. And one last comment. My mother was the head hostess at Howard Johnson's for 23 years in Villanova. You know, I would pick her up at the train stations and so forth and so on. So I'm not only familiar, by going to the site in the last month. I know this area very well. I had friends who had worked on very different properties, TV Guide, Chilton. When I worked in a family landscape business, we maintained properties that are actually in the PLO district. I've known this district for about 50 years. Sometimes I'm stuck in a little bit of traffic, sometimes I'm not. But in terms of strengthening the ability of that PLO district, I think the ordinance is good. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Public comment?
I would rather have you guys. Go ahead.
If everyone just takes, a couple minutes apiece, we can get through this.
Could I get the screen up again? Yes. I showed this before, but there's been a lot of talk about the by right plan and the lot area. Now you could zoom out. Two quick points on this. I believe this was the approved zoning hearing board plan. On this plan, and maybe you'll have to zoom in a little bit, but it shows that the basis of it was that the research building was 183,000 square feet, and it required 184 parking spaces at the 1 space per 1,000 ratio. So that's, in our view, why they could get that much square footage. Number one, and number two, it does show that the lot area was 18.73 acres. And I know what Kevin is saying. There's been this one zoning board decision that they reversed him at the Adelberger site. But our view of it is this is a major rewrite that will support a lot of density. And since you're doing such a major rewrite, take the opportunity now to get the lot area definition right, at least here. And it just, I've never seen where you should count 7 acres underneath a limited access highway, and take the time to put that in now, I think is very important. The other point, Kevin mentioned the traffic mitigation. He did point to the adverse impacts in the conditional use part. That goes back to what I said. In our view, I believe the law is that with a conditional use, you can't deny it on adverse impacts because there's too much traffic, because allowing the use, you anticipated that by allowing that use, that was the normal traffic. So somebody has to show that it's more traffic than it would have been expected, and that more traffic than would have been expected has to have the adverse impact. So they can't just say, boy, we allowed all this, there's a heck of a lot of traffic here. You can't deny it unless you show, well, that's not the traffic that should have been, it was something more. I know you're under a lot of pressure. We appreciate you having this special meeting. We know you're under a lot of pressure to take a vote. We ask that you continue to work on this. Even if you take a vote, we think it needs a lot more work, and we're a little afraid. The commissioners are very busy. Once you take a formal vote on it either way, it'll be out of your realm, and it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of time spent on this particular ordinance. I think it came out in October, so you've had it for 2 or 3 meetings. So we ask that you keep working on it. We'll keep working with you. And I would like to finally just end by saying, we've said it before, but we're not against mixed use. We're not against a certain amount of office. We're not against a rec center. So, but we do have our concerns, and we appreciate you listening to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that the end of public comment?
Okay, and just quickly on what George had commented to, one on the by right plan.
Remember we said this isn't going to be a back and forth between the various parties?
But he brought it up, and that's why.
But we don't take everything
Okay,
everyone
just
says on
so you
face
know.
value. We can all
Just
do
to-
our own thinking up here.
Just that your zoning officer approved the by right plan for 475,000 square feet. What it involved was building parking structures on it. All right, so he approved that. Also, remember the area, the right-of-way area is 7 acres. It's basically 7 acres of open space. It is wooded area. And so take that into consideration also.
Thank you. Rich?
Rich Booker, Belrose Lane. First of all, just as an aside, I would ask the Planning Commission for these kind of important things, please have these at the regular time. I think it's a hardship for a lot of us to come out at 2 o'clock, and it's very important that we be able to do so. So I would ask that we make every effort to do that in the future. I like Mr. Zinkowski's commentary. To me, we have to totally take this facility out of the ordinance. It doesn't belong there in the ordinance anyway. But it's certainly something that the neighbors and I personally think really is not appropriate in this location, although probably a lot of other places in Radnor it could be. But we just, as part of the biomed site, we have a very strong objection to it and don't want to see that. So let's take Bob's advice here, I think, and let's take it out of the ordinance. We don't have the money, anyway, what he said. Now, ordinances in general, and I've said this before to the board, but it's come up a couple of times. We have this, whether you ask the Villanova people, whether you ask Biomed, you say, well, why don't you use the ordinary planning and zoning processes to approve your property? And what you'll always hear is, well, this, and basically, we wouldn't get approval to do it, right? That's what they always say. We wouldn't get the approval to do this, so that's why we need to do a conditional use or a conditional use ordinance. And I think that that's the main reason why we have to be very, very critical and take a very stringent review, because we know what the purpose is. The purpose is one purpose, and that is to avoid the planning procedures that we have in place. And my position is, let's have everybody work off the same rules. Honestly, the conditional use ordinances are really a problem for the people in the township, and I just ran an election, and I talked to hundreds of people, and there is broad concern in our township about the overuse of conditional ordinances for approvals for a specific property. So that said, we have the guys from Brandywine who I think are great business people and great lawyers and developers, and the people at Biomed, great company. Matt and Mike are great people, great business people, very conscientious. And what I'm not against any of our businesses. I'm for the business people. This is about our township, our rules, how we apply our law, and how we maintain our businesses and our neighborhoods and our quality of life. So I'm not against any of our business people. They're great, and they're really, and these guys are some of the top in the business, and these people make a lot of money, and they're very important people, and they're sitting here with us today. So you know how important this project is to all of us, to them and to us in the township. Now, Biomed, I think we want to have this site redeveloped. We need to have it redeveloped. It's an old site, and the problem here is they have a legitimate issue. What their concern is they're saying, boy, you know what? We can't get laboratory uses anymore. So this facility that was designed and built in the 50s, it doesn't work with the business of today. That's why we need to have this.
Rich, we don't need a summary. We know all this. Could you please make your specific points? Because it's 4:30, and really it's 4:30. Right. We still have to have our discussion. And you're giving us a report on, why they might want to redo the site. We all know that. Make your specific points.
I could finish more quickly if I wasn't interrupted.
I don't think you could.
I really think that you're slowing me down. Now, here's the point. They have a legitimate issue about how they can utilize their site. And that's what's driving them to try to get around what they think that they could get otherwise, or the by right, and that's the thing. Now, as a person who's going to be on the Board of Commissioners, I would be willing to look at ways to help them so that we could get people who would bring back laboratory uses to this facility, right? So I personally would have no objection to some kind of business privilege tax or other methods that we could attract laboratory use, and that we could maintain a consistent use for the site like we have. I'm only one person, and I don't know that it's just my idea, but the point is, if we can find a way to use the site as it's currently used, boy, that would be great, rather than having to deal with this. Otherwise, what we would want them to do is to use the traditional procedures to get their site approved for their development and we'll work with zoning hearing, and we'll work with the planning commission to work through the issues with variances, special consideration, special approvals, et cetera. So that's what but we do think this is someplace that we really do need, and we don't have any objection to doing a development there. The total site area issue, it's been raised a couple of times. So if we have to have an ordinance, and I see Julia wants to have a vote on this, and I would recommend that we table this, but if you have to have a vote, you have to have an ordinance, which again I think I disagree with in principle. Then let's talk about specifically in the ordinance. In this ordinance, and one of the other gentlemen just made the reference. This is the time when we write the ordinance and get it really tight. So what I would say is, when you're calculating your site area for use in the ordinance, it should be the site area that is currently a tax parcel you pay taxes on. It should also be owned in the same entity, right? So it should not be separate entities. It's not even common ownership. If you have one LLC that owns the main parcel, you should require that all be part of what you're using, and you should exclude rights of way. I think that this is the time to write that in. Finally, what I would say is, while we know the legalities of what you can demand and what you can ask, leave it to the Board of Commissioners to work with the developers to craft solutions that would provide for off-site improvements or other funding for other areas. So we don't need to write that all in right now. We don't need to say we can't get it. It's impossible to get. It's not against the law. Leave it to the Board of Commissioners. We can work with the developers and come to an agreement that people, both sides, can live with. So that's my commentary. Thank you.
Is there any other board comment from anyone who has not had a chance to speak? Thank you. Okay, board. Half an hour. Who can talk fast? I have a list of items that have come up in our previous discussions, and a couple of things in individual meetings with people. I'm going to run through this list, and then you can let me know which things are important to you, which things you want to discuss, and if you have other items, we'll put those in. Skipping past the traffic things, all of the points that I had have been covered. Some of the smaller things, green roofs came up, possibly requiring more. Incentives built in that are stronger for train tickets, and stronger incentives for employers to provide transit incentives. Discussing the best way to limit the parking, like what numbers are right for getting the parking low enough so that it increases the ability of the site to encourage the transportation uses, but high enough so that it works for the tenants. Signage came up. There's been some thought we need to have a discussion about signs and what we want to see from 476. Limit extra traffic, approximately the schools came up. The possibly changing that number for the over 10 acres, under 10 acres for the mixed use. We thought we might want to adjust that. The recreation center stadium/arena language has come up, and again, our township manager brought that up also. I also have, the counting the PennDOT right away. We discussed that a little bit. We'll get back to that. Buffers to the schools for various uses. And I have a comment here on stormwater, planning for the overdesign of the retention capabilities, and that the conditional use should trigger that. And then I have a note on, which we've already talked about briefly, which is that in looking in the big picture at this ordinance, keeping in mind why we're doing it, obviously it'd be a benefit to the property owner, but why is it a benefit to the township? And again, I'd refer us back to Mr. Kamida's comments about how this is very much in keeping with our comprehensive plan. And in terms of township goals, the economic development for the township to benefit from. I think this is the right area for it. If you look at the whole township, I think this is where it needs to be, right off of the highway and in an area that's already businesses. We'd be looking at probably more than $2 million a year, just on the one site, and many millions of dollars in improvements, off-site or immediately adjacent to the site. So the benefits of the township are there. The proposal for the ordinance fits into our comprehensive plan. I think we need to discuss the items that have come up, traffic and all these other items, and anything else that you all have on your list that I might not have. Who wants to start?
I'll take a few, and I'm sure I'll chime back in later, but I'll try to talk fast.
Great.
First off, I want to make sure that we remove in section E, subsection 1(4), which relates to...
page?
Okay. Page 3 in the clean copy.
Thank you.
So it's 4 that gets removed. I have a question on
You're making notes on this?
regulations, let's see. Side yards. I think a lot of the side yards are too small. Specifically, I think there was a 5-foot one here somewhere. I forget what it was adjacent to, but we need to look at side yards. There is no required minimum distance between a building and parking structure. That has to be addressed. Getting to...
Well, let's go ahead and take those as you go along.
Well, there's some bigger ones than that.
Okay.
Theoretically speaking, how does a green roof help you with traffic? It doesn't.
It helps you with other things, not traffic.
Yeah, but the problem here is traffic. We're talking about bonuses for density, which relates to traffic. How does extracting money from the township to put in a crosswalk at a school help you with traffic? So many of these requirements here are just extracting money from the developer to do developments elsewhere. It does not help with traffic. So I think where you're giving density modifications on there and allow for greater density, you're just getting money. What is our quality of life worth in Radnor? How much do we want to sell it for? Why are we living here? Why are we paying taxes here? What about our quality of life and the other people on there? I don't think it should be bought with a crosswalk to a school on there. And I think traffic is the main issue here, and that's what we need to address. Do we want to increase density? No, I don't want to increase density. I think if you build what you're entitled to build, I have no problem with mixed use. I think it's a good idea. But why should we give bonuses? I don't think we should at all, period. You cannot make an employee take a train. When you're interviewing employees, I don't know how many of you have ever hired people, but when you're interviewing people, you don't ask if they're going to take a train or a car. You want to make sure they can get there. I will ask if they have a car. How do you plan on getting here? Is it convenient for you to get here? Because if it's not convenient for you to get here, you may hire them, but they're not going to last long. You're going to hire the person who is most qualified to do the job that you're looking to fill, not somebody who's going to take a bus or a train over a car. So I think, although the concept may be laudable, in the real world, it doesn't work. In the real world, if it takes them an extra 45 minutes to an hour to get there because of traffic, they'll either leave the job or the person who is running the property will leave and go elsewhere where they don't have that problem. And I think that's why Brandywine is fighting here, because they're concerned that that may happen to their properties. And I agree with them on that. If you can't lease it, you have empty buildings, your tax rates are going to go down because they did before when those buildings were empty. I don't know if you remember that, about 20 years ago or so. I think a tax break was given to them while the buildings were empty, while they're going through renovations. But I do not think there should be any bonuses for traffic in here at all. And I don't think extracting money for a project that is not traffic related will do anything. I'm against the concept of it. Now, we could spend the next 20 minutes and really do nothing to this ordinance that is of any consequence. I think we're kidding ourselves on there, and I think it's a waste of time.
I agree with Kathy. I just want to take a step back with regard to the density. The one thing that I took a quick look at in my whole analysis of all of this is to look at what's allowed in the existing PLO to understand what are we further allowing and considering to allow. And the one thing that struck out to me, and maybe Peter or Kevin can clarify this, but one of the accessory uses, which is 28063C5, is a parking structure when constructed as an accessory structure for the purpose of eliminating allowable surface parking. The must ordinance that we're creating will allow them to build all sorts of density and a parking structure on top of it to accommodate the density. And, oh, by the way, in the gross floor area, which is part of the calculation ultimately about density, parking structures aren't going to count towards that. And actually, Delaware Planning Commission made a comment about that. And, whether or not you agree that a parking structure should be counted as gross floor area, just the fact that we're, in this ordinance, we would let them go up higher, which for the most part, I didn't have a lot of problem with increased height, as a method to increase density. And when the parking structure can be added on in addition to allowable surface parking, we are talking about a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous amount of density. And whether it's a parking structure, or it's a building, or it's a hotel, or it's an office, it's all impervious, and it's all going to ultimately impact stormwater, even with stormwater management, which, because one of the things I'm learning through via Maya Van Rossen's work that she's done at Villanova is that our stormwater management ordinance could do a whole lot more. So, yeah, 20 minutes or not, but it's density which drives traffic, which drives quality of life. And if we can figure out a way to decrease the allowable parking, and I have some thoughts on that, then I'm going to be more comfortable with allowing for the development. But I'm opposed to the bonus as well. This must ordinance in and of itself is a huge bonus of density.
One of the issues that I have with this ordinance is that its reason for existence, as I gather it, is because of the relationship to public transportation. And yet, our dialogue, if you want to call it that we've had here today, seems to prove to me conclusively that the studies are just not there to demonstrate that there is a provable relationship between the proximity of these buildings to the train lines that have been sitting there for almost a century, I guess, at this point. It's happenstance that that's where they happen to be. We don't have anything to back up the notion that the relationship between these buildings and those train lines is somehow going to have a synergistic effect that will reduce traffic and allow the greater density through the various bonus programs that are in here. I think what we're going to wind up with is just more density and more traffic, and the train lines aren't really going to count for anything. Some of the examples that have been given, notably the ones in Conshohocken and Spring Mill, completely different situation. A post-industrial wasteland that was bulldozed and turned into hotels and some offices, and of course, very, very large number of apartments or condominiums. That's not what's going on here. And those numbers and the ratios and percentages of increased ridership in that area bear no significance whatsoever and cannot be a reasonable guide to what will happen here. So accordingly, it seems to me that the way this is presently drafted, there should be some teeth in it to make sure that, and I don't know if you can do this from a legal standpoint, to make sure that employees, you can't ask them, obviously, if they have cars and so on, and you can't discriminate that way. I guess maybe you can discriminate that way. But one of the things that you can do is employers can offer pre-tax transit passes purchased with pre-tax dollars. They can fund it. They can do all sorts of things to encourage people to use public transportation. I haven't heard word one about that. Not word one. And at least that would have shown some true inclination to really make this a workable project where there is an effect between public transportation and these buildings. The other issue I'm having is that, and I'm no traffic expert, but it's clear to me that you can massage the numbers however you want to massage them to make them come out to where you want them to be. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. For those reasons, I'm not liking this ordinance, even though I want to see the township being able to tax somebody a lot. I also would like to see multi-use. I want to see the project, I don't want to see it a derelict property. I want to see it put to use. But there are certain problems that we have here which I don't think have been solved and are not being solved by the ordinance. I also have one question for Peter. The rejection of Kevin's ruling as to the Adelberg property, can that be unwound in some fashion legally as to the acreage that's under an interstate highway in this situation?
That ruling just went to how impervious surface is calculated in the township, and it's entirely based on our ordinance's language. If the township decides to write the ordinance differently, then it's treated differently. But the zoning hearing board ruled on the current zoning ordinance's language and determined that when calculating the impervious surface ratio of a site, you include in the base number the land in the right-of-way, but you don't include the impervious surface located in the right-of-way. But that's based on how the ordinance is written. And
Okay,
Kevin
so-
is correct that that's the way the township has done it for years and years and years.
But there's no equal protection argument or res judicata argument that prevents you from changing it?
Well,
At this
I
point-
think it would be inappropriate to change it for one particular site. We could change it for the district as a whole, yes. But then if we change it for the district as a whole, I think from a policy standpoint, you might want to change it for the township as a whole. I don't think you should treat the districts differently.
That's what I was getting at, not segmenting off one district. I got it. Thank you.
I still struggle with why the Radnor Corporate Center is included in this. I understand the spot zoning issue, but why don't we just limit it to all the contiguous properties that are right there? And it is supposed to be a transit-oriented development, and that's where the transportation is. It's not by the Radnor Corporate Center, not that close anyway. As far as the 7 acres, whether it's included or doesn't include it, if that's our ordinance, I'd leave that alone. But I think the property is, it's just way too dense. And, you know, I'm concerned about the traffic. If you take the Biomed property just out and say, assume it doesn't exist, and you take the existing, and you take out Radnor Corporate Center, you're left with about 665,000 square feet, and you assume another 200,000 square feet of other corporations in the area. You're looking at 850,000 feet with 4 employees per 1,000 feet. You're looking at 3,400 employees, and only 170 are getting off now in the morning at the train station. That's 5%. So if you boil that math down and you start at a bonus and you say 80% is the bonus, that's 950,000 feet. If you extrapolate all that down, you wind up with something along the order of like 50 to 60,000, or 50 to 60%, I'm sorry, is the number as opposed. So I don't believe in any bonus. I also believe in taking the 70 down to something along the order of 50%, 55%, 60, something like that, but a significant decrease, and no bonus. I think the traffic, we gotta have some teeth in the traffic mitigation. We gotta understand, you know, I mean, that's my way of dealing with it, but we gotta understand the impact, and we got to have some ability to, if we're going to increase the density and increase the traffic, yet have no ability to make the applicant do anything about the traffic increase, that to me, that's nuts. I don't understand that. I don't have any, the shared parking percentages, all that's, I'm okay with that. Stormwater, I think, is an issue that needs to be addressed appropriately. As far as encouraging public transportation, I'd just get out of that whole business entirely. They're going to take what they take. We're never going to police it. It sounds nice, we'll pass the ordinance, and it'll be totally ignored. I wouldn't even waste our breath on it, personally. And that's it.
I have 2 questions. One first for Kevin. Kevin, hypothetically, we pass this. And that means that a potential applicant can either avail themselves of the max must provisions, including bonus, or they can say, no, the 70% is fine, or 70 FAR is fine, or they can say, we'll operate under the PLO because we don't want to do any of these studies. Is that true?
That is correct. I remind you that the existing PLO is what got us into this situation with the traffic to begin with, and that this ordinance will go a long way in starting to correct the ills of the past, so.
But
Yes.
But if they come in and say, my God, the traffic's horrendous, this would be $2 or $3 million, and then it would work, and you say, fine, write the check, and they say, no, we're going to stay under the PLO, they could do that.
Yeah, we're not shoving this down any applicant's throat. If they want to avail themselves of the provisions of this ordinance, they can. We heard earlier that, somebody would be writing a check for a crosswalk. The applicant's installing the improvements if those improvements are approved by the board. It's not, a money grab by the township. It's the applicant putting these improvements in. Crosswalks do have effect on pedestrian circulation, which then promotes use of public transit, which, it's all interconnected. So look at TODs, and this is what TODs are about, and just Google it, and you'll find that these types of densities are in proximity to these types of mass transit opportunities, and this is an appropriate ordinance.
I think one of the issues that keeps coming up is that all the parking's free. And I think that might, unfortunately, that's not on the list of things that you do, but that might, in and of itself, be the greatest encouragement for more transit use. But that's a separate issue. I have a problem with the density, as other people have said. The thing I said to you earlier is that their by right from 4 years ago is 475, and we do have to focus on the individual site, but be that as because they're the applicant. But if you go from 475 to 900, even with a mixed use, it's too much for me. And I would say that some of the things I've seen from all sorts of sources, whether it's Brandywine or their planner or independent planners or my own assessment, is that if the office, let's say, was 60% of the current by right in the PLO or something like that, and the other uses size-wise, and the other uses were from another source, that would definitely lower the density, for example, on this site to maybe 600 instead of 900,000. I have a question now to jump over to Peter. And this is sort of like, I apologize for not being a professional planner and not knowing all this, but in other circumstances in other years when, for example, the local sewer plant didn't have enough capacity, there was a moratorium on new hookups, which in effect was a moratorium on development. Is there any precedent for analyzing the existing traffic on the affected roads and determining that we have to have a moratorium on new trip generation, which inevitably comes out of that driveway onto that road until improvements are made, whoever makes the improvements?
No, there's been, not exactly in this fashion, but townships within the last decade have tried to do moratoriums on development, and the courts have found that that is not permitted under the municipality's planning code.
Unfortunate. Okay, thank you.
Julia, the one other big thing that we haven't talked about at all that I just want to make mention, I am going to want to address, is all of the language that's in here about signage. And the reason I mention that is that, interestingly, neither side of the table has mentioned anything, so they must love it. But just so everybody... Well, just when I read the existing sign language, we don't allow lit signs, and the existing ordinances for signs are significantly, significantly smaller than what's proposed in this ordinance. And we would be the only township, because I've driven up and down the Blue Route, that would have lit signs seen from the road, with the exception of the Metroplex up in Plymouth Meeting, where the Lowe's and the Best Buy and all that is. And I just, from a visual quality of life standpoint, I don't want us to look like a lit up township from the highway.
There's 2 points that came up about that in some of the conversations that I had, and one was the aesthetics. What do you want? And the other one was, we don't want to create a situation where people are alerted that there might be things off of this exit. Like if you're not coming here for business or to stay in the hotel, we don't want you coming down because you're thinking, oh, there's a hotel sign. I bet there's a bar. I bet there's a gas station. I bet there's a whatever.
They probably do. The people who...
Saying I don't.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. That's why I think neither side has mentioned a problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to make... I think that this thing should encompass a holistic approach in terms of the traffic and the development of the area, that we should be doing that at the ordinance level rather than as individual development stuff, if there's some way we can do that. Traffic flow, especially if you're going to include the piece over by, what's it, the Radnor Corporate Center back by the elementary school, then I think that should be part of a, sort of like a circulatory route or something. Just my thought, but we need to include that. I really think the mixed-use stuff is a good idea, it's very helpful. It's very dense, I'm not as concerned about the density, but that's all right. Finally, to me, stormwater is really important because of the problems we're having all over the township, and I think that's really, really important. I do like the idea of the green roofs, since we do them all the time. And they do help with stormwater a great deal.
I couldn't hear you.
The green roofs help with stormwater a
Green
lot.
roofs for the stormwater help. All right, so why don't we now go through some of the bigger items? And I think our goal should be we're not going to fix this and make it perfectly what everybody wants. That's okay. I think what we should do is address the larger issues, decide what, as a commission, what our opinion is or what our position is, and maybe take a lot of little votes on each one so that we know where everybody stands, so that we can get our comments to the commissioners and let them know what things bother us the most, what things we have issues with, those kinds of things. So let's start with density.
I'm still struggling with why we have to vote tonight, and maybe I'm missing something. I watch most Board of Commissioners meetings. I'm not hearing the Board of Commissioners, Kevin, nod or shake your head. I don't hear them rushing to get this back, and I'm wondering if, one more meeting where we don't have about 2.5 hours worth of presentations, but we take the time to go through the ordinance, to craft a comprehensive list, then followed by an up or down vote. Would that be a more helpful way to go, unless we're going to stay beyond 5 o'clock, which...
Oh, I think we have to.
Okay, so if we're going to do...
And I apologize. But I think we can do that now.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I don't think we can.
right.
And I don't think we should be pushed on this. I think every time a commission is pushed to do a midnight decision, and I call this a midnight decision, they usually get it wrong because they miss something. I think this is too important to the township to jam it down our throats now, even if we stay another hour. And I object to staying another hour, quite truthfully.
Well, why don't we take a vote now about that issue? Why don't we take an informal vote? Who would like to work another half an hour, hopefully, and get through these points and get our opinions to the commissioners? Because I don't feel like it's being jammed down my throat. I have a pretty good understanding now. I have an understanding of the ordinance. I have an understanding of the staff's studies. I have an understanding of what the other property owners want, and I've heard everything here that everyone has said.
I have an
I don't feel like
understanding
this is
too,
being
but
stuffed down
there's
my
a lot
throat.
in here that I think needs to be changed, and I don't think we should do a rush job on it. And even if we stayed another hour, we're not going to cover it all. We need another whole meeting that is just this, and then maybe we'll cover it.
Okay.
As a meeting
Is
separate
it all
from
right
our
with you
normal
if we
planning
take a
commission.
vote on just
Sure,
how to
absolutely.
proceed? Okay,
Yep.
this is just a vote on how we should proceed. Do you guys want to stay for what we're hoping won't be too long to go through the list of things that, the small things like the signs and things that we all listed, the green roofs, and those couple of big issues, like how we'd like to see the density, how we'd like to see traffic mitigation have more teeth to it? Or do you want to not send our comments to the commissioners at this time and have another meeting?
I think it's the context of, is it an up-down vote with comments, or is it just comments?
Well, no, because we can't.
Can we send the comments without?
No. And we can vote no and send comments. We could vote yes and send comments. It's really the comments that I want to get to the commissioners. I want them to have
All right.
our recommendations.
I vote that we stay for a half hour and try and get through as many of the comments and make decisions on each line item as we can. And if we run out of time, either we send the comments with the vote we send, or then next meeting we just pick it up and we just finish the remaining comments that we didn't get time for.
Okay, all in favor of Steve's approach?
I'm in favor of discussing it for a half an hour.
Okay. Opposed to Steve's approach? Okay, 3 to 4. So we stay. Thank you.
But a real half an hour.
Which one's first?
Let's start with density.
Do you want to do that approach, or do you want to do that? Remember when we went kind of page by page when we did this with Villanova?
Yeah, but I don't want to be crossing Ts and dotting Is. I want to hit the main issues. So do you think we could do that?
I don't.
It's not, I don't think it's our job to cross the Ts.
You know, Julia, don't construe my half an hour as saying that I'm necessarily prepared to vote on it today.
Yeah. That was clear to me.
Okay.
That you're not.
I miraculously, I might be, but I doubt it.
Okay, my sense of what I've heard from everyone here is that they feel that the density is too high. And alternatively, they don't want to have any density bonuses. Now, personally, I'd like the density bonuses. I like the way that that works, but I also think that the overall density is too high. Does anyone have any?
Do you like the density bonuses for bonuses? Because I like all those things, but that they have to do them just to be able to get to do this at all. Like, those are the things that they should have to be doing as part of approval for a must. That's where I fall on. It's not like I don't like those density bonuses, although, interestingly, I did write myself a note here. What I really liked was Brandywine's approach. See, what I figured is that if these two sides each wrote something between the middle of them, I liked Brandywine's conditional use criteria and their density bonus program, but I like that stuff as just part of what they can do to be able to even do this. I very much like their approach. I liked their approach of the yield plan, of let's take a look at what's the yield here now, and then if you want to do the must, then you provide these various mitigations. The part I'm having trouble with, and I think why I feel I need to think about it, is this is the first ordinance we've looked at where the calculation is not about impervious coverage and 38 feet high, foot high building. We have barely touched about height, but part of the reason they're able to get all this density in is that we're considering letting them go to 91 feet and 120 feet. And I don't know how to calculate the math. Maybe a planner could tell me what that translates to in terms of impervious coverage if we were talking about a building that was closer to 38 feet or 4 stories or 5 stories. I have a hard time ratcheting down what we need to have for coverage to lower that FAR. I don't know how to do that math.
Okay.
So that's where I'm struggling with even calculating density. And that's one of the reasons why I very much liked Brandywine's yield plan approach. And I read all about it in their version. I didn't like everything in theirs, but I did like that.
Anybody else?
I can see the possibility of a bonus structure, but the thresholds have to be set lower. And I think that the office piece is too large in the mixed use. And somehow, some way, that's the biggest traffic problem, and that's still going to be a problem if we leave it at that height.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see us try and be a little more specific. Are we supposed to be specific? I mean, should we be saying that, given Skip's comment, this is a procedural question, so, I mean, this is too high or this is too much, or should we be saying that we think instead of the total max build-out of 950,000 feet, it should be 600,000 feet?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should go back to Susan's idea of going through it page by page, because that way, like I was trying to get some of the big ideas out there first and have an agreement, but I think it's going to be too many different points of coming at it. So let's do that. Okay, I'm on the unmarked version, page 1. Any issues on the purposes, definitions, that easy stuff at the beginning?
In designation, I have a quick question, but I don't want a long answer. In one of the earlier iterations, it called for, when there's a conflict or inconsistency between this section's regulations and other regulations of the zoning ordinance and saldo. That was in an earlier version that Nick did, and I don't know why that was eliminated. And also, the last sentence of that designation, where it says 280.64 through 280.65.1 shall not apply. When I read through those special regs and that section, I would keep those as applicable.
What were they?
Yeah,
I don't remember.
I looked at them. It did have to do with some kind of important stuff, I'm sorry.
Susan, the reason why the
Saldo.
saldo was eliminated is that during land development, they can ask for waivers if there's a conflict, and that's the way it should go. The sections you refer to are the general sections for the PLO district, and so I think that was included to make it clear that if you opted to use the must, you follow the must requirements. If you opted not to use the must, you follow the general district requirements.
Yes, I think the special regulation that I liked, and I think actually George said something that indicated to me it might have dealt with this, whatever this 18 versus 26 acres is that 28065 special regulations, the tract of land on which each permitted use is conducted shall in its entirety be owned and operated as a single or common management unit. And I don't know if that would have taken care of the issue with, let me put it this way. Maybe it does or doesn't matter, but why would we want to increase density and get rid of a regulation that would say that the property could be owned by a variety of management and maintenance units? I think that would open it up to inconsistency on a piece of property. But I don't have a strong feeling, but thank you for clarifying the other part, Peter.
The one problem with having it as a single management unit, if you have a mixed use, you're going to have, you don't have many times commercial operators who do offices, hotels, restaurants, the whole.
Okay, so that was the reason. Okay, that's fine.
I think that was an issue, a worry with the township.
Okay.
All right,
That's
then
good.
I'll let that go. That
Anything
makes
else on
sense.
that page, on
Yeah,
page 2?
under use regulations with regard, actually, it's a question on parking. If you have like a medical office building,
Yes.
that seems to require, from experience, a lot more parking than, say, a regular office building because of patients in the waiting room. And you always have a lot of people hovering kind of in line waiting to go in. And I'm wondering if these different accessory uses kick into different parking requirements. Do you happen to know?
Our code does not regulate medical office from business office, and it's all under the same provision, but all the subordinate uses then defer back to those that they would be principal uses.
Can we change that in this with regard to medical office buildings, since this is an entirely new approach?
We could. We'd also then need to develop separate parking standards. I think what we have now works in terms of parking for office and combining it as one use. I don't see that there's a whole lot of differentiation between, every ordinance is different. Some ordinances treat them the same, even though they're spelled out separately, the same parking requirements. So there's not really a standard, one standard that one could point to.
I think at this point, since this is a whole new ballgame here, we might want to think about creating some additional parking requirements for something like a medical office building.
But I'm not sure that they need more parking.
Well,
I mean,
they
the
do with a
town
lot of
has,
other.
the town has rules about the parking, right? Do our other medical office buildings not have enough parking?
They're parked in accordance with the code, and sometimes they could be parked non-conforming from previous editions of the code. I haven't done that analysis, but it depends on the site and the peak hour at that particular site.
Okay.
Well, from experience in Bryn Mawr, the new medical office building, it is a parking problem. They're parking on the municipal lots that are for retail sales. And I'm president of the Bryn Mawr Business Association. I'm aware of the parking problems we have due to the increase in the new centralized medical office building. I've seen it in other properties in Haverford Township where a medical office building has come in and they go by the normal parking requirements. And because of the number of staff members, the number of patients waiting, there's insufficient parking. It goes over into the retail areas. And we just had a testament tonight where there's been a situation at the Penn at Radnor where there's lack of parking there. How many more do you need? The other thing is if you have a hotel that may have a banquet space, no additional parking requirements there. That's a problem. Suppose there's a banquet during the day when the offices are there, and it's highly likely they could do that in this sort of facility. So I think when you have some intense
parking requirement types of business, like a medical office building. And I think all of us know that even though you might have 1 or 2 doctors there, you'll have 10 patients waiting in the waiting room. Where are they parking? Look at the number of staff they have to handle paperwork in there. It's more than 1 doctor, 1 patient now.
And I think I'm pushing back on that because I want to have overall less parking, because I want people to take the train.
But you have to be realistic. You're not going to get people to take the train, and this is a suburban community. It's not in a city, and that's the problem. Ardmore maybe. I don't think it's going to work here.
Just hang on for that for a second. We skipped over definitions. So we skipped over a pretty big comment from...
Well, let's finish this conversation.
Okay.
We'll go back.
I will tell you, one thing that would... I don't know the answer to this question. I know that there's not enough parking at Penn Medicine at Radnor because I know for a fact, because I know employees who work there, who actually lease space from 201 King of Prussia Road. What I don't know is Penn Medicine at Radnor, a property that has an existing nonconformity with regard to our current parking standards, or do they have enough parking for our current parking standards, but the medical center requires a higher level than what our code requires, and that's the reason I know there's a parking shortage. I don't know if the source is that it's an existing nonconformity with regard to that.
Okay.
And that might be something, if we could get that piece of information, that might help inform us with regard to Kathy's position on it versus your thought on it. And I hear what you're saying, but I know for a fact that they lease off.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's take... No, absolutely not. I would like to know, let's take just an informal vote. Who would like for that to be one of our comments to the commissioners, that we're concerned about the parking numbers for the more intense uses, including hotel, banquet, and medical uses?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, make a note of that, Skip. Let's go back to the definitions.
Can I get clarification that there's not enough parking for the more intense uses? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
There's a concern there may not be.
That our parking regulations might not be adequately providing for it.
Okay.
And then from there, we might make a different
definitions?
decision.
What was your point?
Oh, gross floor area.
Okay.
This is where I wanted to point out to you that the calculation of gross floor area shall not include parking structures, and the Delaware County Planning Commission opined that we should include it. Also, in other parts of zoning, the floor area is just 80% on a lot. And then on the definition of site and total site area, site specifically says that it includes the rights-of-way, and total site area, both the Delaware County Planning Commission and Glacken recommended that the gross area of a lot, should be included less the area of any public streets, easements, and/or rights-of-way. And when I looked at the Saldo definition of this, it says that it's calculated from the site survey rather than from a deed. So it seems to be somewhat in conflict. But it gets down to,
do we want to make a point here?
Do we think rights-of-way should be part of a site area? And to the extent that we have some inconsistency in our code, and we do with regard to the definition
And we've had
of-
that problem with the Adelberg and...
Yeah.
Okay, well, what do people think? Do we want to include, do we want to we recommend, obviously we don't approve, do we want to recommend that within this district, the site area will include right-of-ways?
Well, Peter,
Or the other way?
Peter, may I ask you a question? Because you referenced that there's an existing, somebody referenced that Brandywine got a decision into their favor in this one. Since this would be a new use, if Brandywine or any other applicant came in for a must, could we have said that the wording is less the area of any public streets, easements, and/or rights-of-way as of the date of conditional use application, so that basically if there's a property that received a favorable ruling in the past regarding the rights-of-way, they, in terms of total site area, they don't get to carry that over into a must application? Is that fair?
I'm not familiar with Brandywine, any of Brandywine's previous rulings. It would depend somewhat on that ruling and what was exactly being interpreted. But generally speaking, if someone comes in for a new application, they're going to have to comply with the requirements of that application. It doesn't always hold true all the time, but generally speaking, that's the case. So if the township passes this ordinance and redefines on how a site is going to be calculated, the size of the site, the boundaries of a site, that's what they're going to have to comply with, the new definition.
So would we like to,
I had one comment on that, two things. Number one, I think if we got this zoning hearing thing that we're trying to buck up against, I wouldn't go that direction, number one. Number two, my concern about going that direction is if we go that direction, we're concerned about overall density. So if we go that direction and we knock that out, and then we decide to, that 70, 80%, whatever it is, we modify that. So in essence, if we all feel like 600,000 feet is the right, or 700, whatever, is the right amount of square footage for the site, but we knock out that impervious, then we've, in de facto, bumped up the density on all the other sites. What I'd rather do is, first off, not buck up against the zoning, leave it the way it is, and then we'll take at the end of the day, I think we're all going to try and come up with some density that we think is right, total square footage. Do it on the big site so we don't artificially kick up the density on the other sites. I don't know if I explained that well.
yeah, I'm okay with that.
I understood it to be the exact opposite of what you're saying. You're saying leave it the way it is, meaning that the rights of way will be included
As site area.
as site, which isn't that going to be the thing that's going to bump up density?
No, because we're going to...
No, because we're going to take it down elsewhere.
We're going to take it down. At the end of the day, we're only going to allow, let's say it's
Hang on, I
whatever
followed
it is.
that part. The part I was trying to understand is how does that artificially increase the density on some other property? That's what I was trying to follow, that last part that you were saying.
Well, in essence, so Biomed's going to be able to, say, do 600,000 feet over 26 acres. Okay, so that'll be the rule. But if we exclude that 7 acres, then they're going to be 600,000 feet over 18 acres.
I follow you. I got it.
Plus, we have a zoning fight on our hands.
Yep. Okay.
Okay? So we're okay with leaving that. All right.
For now.
Anything else on page 3?
Parking structures.
Oh, sorry, the parking structures. How do we want to do that? What was your recommendation, Susan?
It's not that it's a recommendation, it's just understanding that to not include them at all as part of gross floor area.
Could be your problem.
There's got to be some acknowledgement that they add a density in and of themselves. That's what I'm trying to figure out, what's the best way to address that.
Why don't we just include it
Just include it.
as part of gross floor area?
I mean, that'll be the thing that'll keep them from overbuilding parking.
I think Delaware County addressed that too.
They did.
Well, let's make a recommendation.
Okay.
What is it that
Well, the problem
gross
with
floor-
doing that, is that Kevin's ordinance has 20%, I think, floor area. And
Correct.
by-
We separate it right now. Accessory structures
That's right.
are not regulated, and the building coverage is 30%. We've reduced the building coverage for principal buildings to 20 and accessory structures to 10. It's a way of controlling how much can be on the site by specifically regulating it.
So are you saying-
Incorporating it in is just, could end up with more parking than what you think you're going to achieve as separate structures.
But are you saying that the parking is an accessory structure and that it is covered in that way?
Yes, it's specifically covered now, whereas previously it was not.
What's wrong with the Delaware County's recommendation that you just do a flat 30% and that covers everything? including
Because it
parking
doesn't
and
regulate how much parking accessory structures you can have. It doesn't control development.
We want
But
to keep
isn't parking
down.
regulated otherwise, though? Isn't that what we were talking about?
This is one of the ways it's regulated.
So it's regulated multiple ways. You're trying to throw another way of regulating it. It's just going to complicate the system. If you leave the percentage for accessory structures at 10%, it defines a cap.
What else is included in accessory structures other than parking structures?
But what do you do about the lower level parking in a building when there's below, how's that going to be counted? It's not going to be part of the gross floor area. and it's not going to be counted as part of the gross floor area, and it's not going to be counted as part of the 10 or the 20%. How's that going to
It
count?
counts as the principal building impervious coverage, but you're also capped at a maximum 105% of the total parking. So the provisions are already there, what you're asking for.
I'd leave it alone for now, and let's just address it when it gets to his.
Anything else on page 3? Oh, can we take out number 4? Is everyone in general agreement that we take out number 4? Okay.
I've seen comments on number 6 that a retail store should be 15,000 square feet.
I think that we want to keep that lower.
Right.
We want to keep it at 10? Is that all
Yeah, I
right?
think the
Okay.
10,000.
I agree.
I mean, I saw those comments too, but
Vote it down. Okay, all right, okay.
it's too small for a huge CVS, was the comment.
I don't want to see this.
I have a question
I want
about
smaller.
5.
Yeah?
On multiple family development with associated amenities, including but not limited to an accessory community center and/or a swimming pool for the use of the residents. I'm not married to this, but do we want to have that as an indoor pool, an outdoor pool? Do we care?
Really?
No. Here's the reason why.
I'm listening.
Here's the reason why I don't want an attractive nuisance. I'm not strong on it. It was just a little note I had. That's
I
all.
want to leave it the way it is.
Okay.
Anything on page 4?
Setbacks.
Why are all these retail stores separated out, at least on my copy, into personal service shops versus retail service shops? Do they have different trip generations? Does anybody know?
I think it's just giving the variety of the types of stores that would work with this type of development if it were
Okay.
mixed use with hotel.
All right. Before we get to, are we still on uses?
Yep.
Okay, on C, right before dimensional regulations.
Yep.
One of the comments that was made, I think by Brandywine, is that this should say, any change in use or the addition of a new use or expansion of a use shall, to an approved must, shall require a new conditional use approval. If you want to expand your use.
What section is that?
It's the last, I got to go back several pages.
Page 4 of the
10, yeah,
Right above
it's
right above dimensional reg-
E1C.
I think if you want to expand your use within what's allowed, you should be able to do that. Because, let's say you build a hotel and you want to add a little bit more on, but you're still within the numbers you would have been allowed to build the hotel. That's okay, right?
Well, what if you want to build a second apartment building? That's an expansion of the
That would
use.
require, any physical change to the site is going to require a new application.
So,
Anything that's going to require a new land development approval is going to require a new conditional use approval.
okay, but what about if you have office, hotel, and apartment, and the office, you come in for your office with relatively the low end of the percentage that we allow, and then you end up wanting to expand your office, which is just an expansion of the use, but it's going to impact traffic.
Yeah, we're
How do you deal with that?
allowing a maximum development here. So if they develop less than that in the beginning, I mean, if we're going to allow them to develop the maximum today, we should allow them to develop half of it today and then the other half in some future date.
Without going through.
With that, yeah.
Well, Peter, maybe answer me this. If there's an apartment building that gets, and an office building, and they expand the
They expand
office use.
they convert some of the apartments into offices.
Yes,
Or they
which is an
convert
expansion
some
of
of
the
the
use.
hotel rooms into residences.
Right.
So it would depend on the conditional use approval. I mean, the conditional use approval can be written in such a way, and normally my office writes them in this way, that, it's based on what's submitted, and that any change in the submission is going to require a new application. So if they come in and say, this building's all apartments, this building's all office, this is a hotel, that's what they have zoning approval for, that's what they have to build. You certainly could add the Brandywine language. It's a little extra protection. Practically speaking, is it necessary? Probably not, but I could see situations where it might add some protection to the township.
I mean, I would put it in, but I can leave it for a note for another day. On dimensional regulations, side yards next to a school, 50 feet, you know, a 90-foot building, it's 50 feet from a school. I think that's too low. Kathy, you were saying you thought some of the setbacks were too low, right?
I think that should at least be 100.
I totally agree with that.
Probably have a group that agrees.
Side yard.
I was concerned,
Does
there were
everybody
several
agree?
places where there were encroachments on schools.
Does everybody
Yeah.
agree with that for the schools, bringing those up? Okay.
Yeah. And 3 side yards abutting uses in the PLO shall not be less than 25. I
We
think
want to
that's,
take that to 50?
yes,
Yeah.
easily. I think you're getting the buildings too intense
All right.
in there.
Everybody okay with that? Any objection? Okay.
Can someone explain this rear yard setback, any lot line parallel to or within 45 degrees of being parallel? I didn't quite get that. I don't even understand what that means. Peter, can you, or Kevin, can you explain that on dimensional regulations 2C?
It's just a further clarification of what would be considered a rear yard, so then you know what would be a side yard, because any yard that's not a rear yard would then be a side yard. I don't know
Yeah,
that I
sometimes
can-
on weird-shaped properties, it's hard to figure out which is the rear
Oh,
yard.
okay.
or-
Clarify. I got
Or
it.
if you're
Got
on
it,
a
got it. Yep,
corner
yep.
property, something like
Okay,
that.
I get it.
Okay, I'm down to G now. Anything before that?
Wasn't there
Yes, on E.
E.
The accessory structures, I agree that 5 feet is too close. If we can't even get an emergency
right.
vehicle back there.
25?
We're going to go 25? Yeah. All right. Now, what do you think about G?
Well, let me just say that the existing PLO is 55%, so 50 doesn't seem like much
All
of a
right.
give back for all the density.
Is this where we insert back to meadow level?
That's under stormwater.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to go back to 55 then, at least? Not make it a, to keep it with the existing
No,
PLO?
55 is more. This number needs to be lower.
Where, remember,
Oh.
they're getting height and all sorts of things like that.
This is the impervious coverage, okay. It's not open
Wondering if
space.
for the additional height, it's like twice the normal height, isn't it?
So what number would you
What-
come up with?
No, not twice.
You thinking 40,
A third?
45?
It's twice.
I don't want to go too
It's
far.
twice statute, but
I mean, I
it's-
want to have the must.
it's not twice existing.
See,
45?
this is where I think input from a planner would have been helpful for us to kind of take these numbers. Kevin, can you give us some context? Because the existing PLO at 55, I mean, a 5% decrease for all this height and density, and I know part of it is that because the parking structures are going to be in addition to the gross floor area. So that's why they still need a high impervious coverage limit in order to get all the parking in. And they can put this, in this scenario, they can put in parking structures and surface parking, whereas an existing PLO, you can put in a parking structure if you rip up surface parking, at least the way I read existing PLO.
How
So-
about 40?
Kevin, is there a way we can make this a little lower and it'll still work?
I wouldn't recommend it. There is, we do go and provide for provisions if they lower it down to 45%. Right now, you'd be seeing about a 300 to 350,000 square foot reduction over the district, going from the 55 to the 50. I wouldn't recommend going below that as the base.
Okay?
Hey, we're counting in, remember they're getting a break on the roadways that are being included, and we need to cut back on the density. This would be a way to cut back on the density.
Okay.
Can I just clarify that,
I'm talking at least 45.
I mean, I would have gone lower than 50. But moreover, I want to clarify that, Kevin, parking garages, although in this scenario, they don't count towards the gross floor area, they do still count towards impervious, correct? There's nothing in here that precludes that.
Correct.
All right.
All right. Can
I think
see
this
show of
number might
hands
end up being
who
a
wants
function
to
of how
stay-
high we let them go and what we end up wanting to calculate for a density. So I'm okay with leaving this for now. I would rather have it lower, but we have to see what.
Let's go forward and then see
Yeah,
where we are.
exactly.
Okay. Building height,
So are you recommending a reduction at this time?
no, but we might later. When we get to the part about the. Okay, it's 5:30. Do you all want to continue? Can I show of hands, who would like to continue and get more of this done and who would like to not? Show of hands if you
I don't
want
think
to
we're going to get
continue.
it done tonight. Yeah. So,
So would you like to stop?
yeah, what would we
Okay.
accomplish? Do we want to stay till 11
But then we're
o'clock?
going to have a plan for when we're going to finish this. I think the options would be, we could do it at our next meeting on the 3rd.
There's not enough time to notify about it.
When would you like to finish this?
I thought it worked well, personally, that we had a separate meeting. As hard as and painful as this is time-wise, I feel like we were able to focus and be respectful of
We
it.
originally had a meeting scheduled for the 5th, I believe, that was canceled. It was going to be a PI meeting.
Oh, was it canceled?
I believe it was. Did we cancel that officially, Kevin?
Not officially.
We could do it then.
It's the Thursday, December. It was going to be another PI
There was
meeting,
gonna
but
be
we
a-
canceled
There was a
it.
scheduled slot for a PI meeting on the Thursday. Thursday the 5th. Would you be available then? Would we have a quorum? You will not be here.
No.
Okay.
Julie, I don't think we're going to have enough time to advertise that,
Oh,
to get it
sorry.
into the paper. So that was advertised as a special PI meeting. We'd be changing the topic of that. We would need to advertise that specifically, so the 5th would not work.
Okay.
This juncture, what's the earliest date? Just so we know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to look at
Is the
calendar.
following Thursday realistic?
I believe we have to, we advertise 3 days prior to the meeting, not including the meeting day.
Right.
So anything next week, I think, would be out.
Okay, so, but the following week, we're okay.
Yep.
People
Right.
aren't working on the 1st?
I'm sorry.
Second?
Second is Monday.
That's 3 days before Thursday, right? We can't,
Yes, but the ad would have needed to have been in.
okay.
I think it's
I'm open to suggestions.
16th?
Ask Kevin, I don't coordinate the meetings.
The 16th, a Monday?
Again, Kevin, do we have a lot on our agenda in January? Kevin, do we have a lot on that you're anticipating for our agenda in January?
I don't know what's on the agenda for January.
Okay.
I think we have
Well, we
December
got
set,
4
but
plans, I think. That's December.
That's
Yeah.
December.
I mean, Peter, do we have to advertise it because it's a continuance?
Well, we have to advertise the meeting itself as a public meeting. In Radnor, there's additional advertising requirements on top of what's required under the Sunshine Act and the MPC, under the Township charter. And I think that's the 3 days is a charter requirement.
I would happily take on the task of notifying on Friday to make sure it's in the paper so that we could do this next week.
Is that what's needed?
We can try. That's all I can say at this point, that we can try to get an ad in on Friday for running in Sunday's paper.
Okay, let's do that.
What paper do you put it
We're
in?
talking about for the 5th.
What paper do you put it in?
And then on the 5th, we're going to pick up exactly where we are. We're not going back to, all right.
I believe it's in Delco Times.
In the evening. We already had a meeting scheduled. Thank you all. Sorry we could not get as far tonight as we'd hoped to. We will do it as quickly as we can. As you can see, we are all working to bring this to a position where we can get our comments to the commissioners.
Which is good, we get there by the 9th.
Hold on. Yeah. So we are tentatively looking at December 5th, a Thursday. We'll have to find out if we can get advertised quickly enough for that to happen.
Many of us are not available on that date.
I understand,
But we're going to be doing the work that night.
but we're going to be talking.
We're not going to have presentations, that's the point,
No,
right?
if you have somebody you could send in case we had questions, that would be great, but it's not going to be a presentation situation. Only if we can't get a quorum. Okay. Thank you all. Have a happy holiday.